the Cardcaptor Wizard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 401 Ron, right? Watching the two wizards transform into obscurities under the oppressive circumstances, an angry silence fell in the screening room. Professor Dumbledore in the corner saw a flash of worry in his eyes. What are you worried about, Credences? Oppression since childhood did not come from him, and he did not contribute to it in any way, so now Professor Grindelwald rarely became righteous. This is a real event, isn't it? Reality doesn't change just because Adam doesn't show this to everyone, but decisions made in a state of anger are irrational. Oh, come on Albus, Professor. Grindelwald couldn't help laughing when he heard this. How many people in this world are sane? If we insist on drawing a boundary, even if it is not to isolate the influence of 7 emotions and 6 desires, we can be called sane, but at least it won't be as irrational as it is after the emotions are guided. After a moment of silence, Professor Dumbledore was not led astray by Grindelwald. What he wanted to say was that these plots would push wizards' attitudes toward muggles to become more radical and impulsive than usual. Emotional guidance goes both ways, Professor Dumbledore, and people always only look at what they want to see. You see, Adam's voice sounded from somewhere. Although Professor Dumbledore was a little surprised, he quickly adjusted and looked at the screen as Adam said. The foursome above had discovered the traces of the invisible beast. Isn't this fat man a muggle? Looking at Jacob on the screen, Professor Grindelwald frowned slightly. Although he still feels that muggles are not as good as wizards, but regardless of his position and personal likes and dislikes, Professor Grindelwald has to admit that Jacob left a deep impression on him. Professor Dumbledore looked at Jacob on the screen and was slightly stunned. Silent. There is no tendency in the guidance of the movie itself. There are muggles who are happy to accept wizards, and there are muggles who hate wizards. Those who see the tendency show their own tendencies. Professor Dumbledore. He was actually the one who first proposed for the greater good back then. Invisible beasts are docile and peaceful in nature, but they will fight back when provoked. Newt is introducing the characteristics of invisible beasts to everyone. It can provide insight into the very close and most likely future, so actions must be unexpected. However, as he observed, Newt discovered a problem, which was what the invisible beast was doing now. It collected a lot of food from the department store, and then came to the attic, as if to feed something. Only then did Newt realize that he seemed, probably had missed a magical animal before, and it should still be a magical animal cub that can't hunt on its own yet. So the invisible beast collects food to feed it. As Newt approached gently, a giant bird snake poked its head out from the shadow of the attic. Seeing the huge size, everyone else couldn't help but gasp. You call this a cub? Tina's face turned pale, and the thing's eyes looked bigger than her face. But then the bird snake that poked its head out opened its mouth and ate the nuts handed out by the invisible beast. The demeanor revealed by its eating movements was obviously the vigilance and cuteness of the cub at this time. Newt also explained the problem of the size of birds and snakes. They are born with the magic of elasticity and can change their size according to the environment. The baby bird and snake hiding in the attic naturally grew into a size that could fill a corner of the attic. Just when Newt stepped forward to comfort the cub, the invisible beast suddenly foresaw a future in which a decorative bell suddenly rang, causing the bird to go crazy and injure Jacob. Then, as expected, Queenie couldn't help but touch the bell when she stepped forward, and the sound stimulated the bird and snake. The invisible beast only made a short judgment and jumped directly on Jacob to protect him. Jacob was indeed not injured when the bird snake was frightened and went crazy. The invisible beast was taking care of the bird snake before. When he was mad, he subconsciously avoided the invisible beast. Oh my God, can birds and snakes be dealt with like this? Ron couldn't help but exclaimed in low voice when he saw Newt and the others actually used a cockroach and a teapot to deal with the bird and snake. They had experienced the tragic experience of being attacked by a group of birds and snakes in the 4th area before. The 3 of them were almost killed on the spot because of their magnificent figures that were constantly changing in size and flying up and down, making it difficult to aim and yet so lethal. Take the house elves away, Professor Scamander's deft use of magical beast knowledge is truly amazing. Harry also recalled that experience, and then said, but I don't think we could get away with this method that time. After all, the bird snake was a hungry baby, and it was normal for cockroaches to attract its attention. and we were intruders who broke into the bird snake's nest. There are even bird and snake eggs in there. It was obvious that in that situation, their hatred value was almost full, and things like cockroaches might not be able to divert the birds and snakes' attention away from them. After thinking about it for a while, Ron realized that Harry was right, so luck is also a very important part when going out for adventure in the movie. The bird and snake chased a cockroach into the teapot. Tina, who was holding the teapot, successfully caught a cockroach and the bird and snake at the critical moment. After taking a deep breath, she couldn't help but look at the person who was covering the teapot with a lid. Newt, did you really catch all the animals that escaped? Newt had forgotten about this bird-snake cub before, and he wouldn't forget about a magical animal like a leopard later, right? When asked this question, Newt could only smile awkwardly, indicating that he really found them all this time. After the exciting action, the scene of everyone taking care of the magical animals in the suitcase was so warm, but as the plot progressed, everyone was enjoying the information revealed in the chat, but some people's hearts suddenly cooled down. Strictly speaking, it was actually someone's heart that cooled down. Sorry, I can't control it. After Newt angrily asked Queenie not to use legilimency on him, Queenie said the above sentence with apology. Ron's heart couldn't help but click at that time, and the smile on his face because he saw the harmony between people and magical animals froze. No. Big sister, you are not really a natural legilimency master, right? What Queenie said just now, it should be that she can control her curiosity, right? It shouldn't be that she is a natural telepath, so she can control her use of legilimency on the people around her, right? There shouldn't be a clear response and explanation for this matter later in the movie, right? Although Ron desperately prayed in his heart that Harry would be immersed in the plot of the movie and forget the bet, the look Harry gave him was obviously meaningful. However, the movie can only be regarded as a hint but not a real hammer, so it is reasonable to deny it, so Harry didn't ask him to fulfill the bet. Chapter 402 Grindelwald and number 039, S. Misjudgment. Ahem, that, Ron spoke with a nervous mood. How about surrendering and losing half? I'll treat you to supper tonight. Harry, who didn't expect the bet to turn around, smiled like a savior and slowly said, no, how could 37 degrees say such cold words? Exclamation mark. Harry was determined not to cancel the bet. If you are in danger of your life, I will save you, but you want me to give up the opportunity to see you make a fool of yourself? That's impossible. Ginny only has a few skirts anyway, and Fred can't choose many styles, and there is no limit on the type of dance. Ron can only wear a floral skirt and twist a few times. This level of social death is not even as good as the famous scenes in the previous movies. It's just that Harry won't tell Ron the truth now. Seeing Ron's uneasy look now is also one of the gains. Suddenly, a piece of paper fell on her hand. Luna looked down and saw that a piece of paper appeared on the back of her hand without knowing when. What's wrong? Hearing the noise, Ralph turned his head quickly. It's okay. It's a note from Adam. Luna smiled and handed the note to Ralph. He has a new clothing store about to open, and the clothing style is specially designed for those young witches. He invited me, Ginny and Hermione to go shopping together and give some comments. Is that so? But why did he send the note at this time? Ralph scratched his head, and the movie was only halfway through. Maybe this was Adam's sudden idea. He sent me the note first because at this time, Adam knew the location of only me among the three people, and he gave us our tickets. Luna put away the note and looked at the screen, saying lightly, Ginny and Hermione asked me to write a letter to invite them, and pick a time when we are all free. It's time for the key plot, Ralph suddenly realized, and then followed them to watch the movie again on the screen. The thunderstorm summoned by the Thunderbird covered the originally sunny weather in the suitcase. Newt looked worried at this scene and said that the Thunderbird had sensed the danger. The audience accepted this well. The soothing plot must be followed by an exciting plot. This is Adam's old trick. As long as the subsequent plot does not directly kill one of the current four protagonists, they can accept it. The camera turned and Graves appeared in Credence's home. The surroundings had become ruins. Graves found Credence, who was touching the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, to summon him. Facing Credence, who sought comfort and help from him, Graves showed a completely different coldness from before. He only cared about the whereabouts of the Obscura. The person who sighed was Professor Grindelwald, who was watching the movie. He had to admit that he had indeed misjudged it at the beginning. He did not expect that the person in front of him was also an Obscure, but who would have thought that an Obscure could grow up so big? According to records, no Obscure has lived past the age of 10. Hearing the emotion contained in this sigh, Professor Dumbledore couldn't help but look at him. Are you still regretful? On the screen, after Grindelwald confirmed that the Obscurial was Credence's half-sister, they were both adopted by the mother who abused them. He decisively abandoned Credence and revealed his true colors. He mercilessly said that Credence was an unteachable squib, who had magic but couldn't master magic, and then went upstairs to find Credence's sister. However, before he could say a few words to the little girl, the wall behind him was shattered by violent magic. The marks were the same as the previous ones, and there was no doubt that they were caused by the Obscurial, but Credence's sister was clearly in front of Graves, huddled up. So the question is, who is the Obscurial who took action? Graves stood up and looked in the direction of the broken wall. Credence was looking at him with grief and hatred, his body trembling slightly for some reason. Professor Dumbledore felt heartbroken, but had to admit that he felt a bit of happiness that shouldn't have appeared. After hesitating for less than a second, Professor Dumbledore chose to release it. I'm a little curious, how did you feel at that time, facing Professor Dumbledore's question? Professor Grindelwald's expression was a little stiff. Graves on the screen realized that Credence in front of him was also an Obscurial, and he was an Obscurial who could control the Obscurial in his body. This was more perfect than he had originally imagined. So Graves, or Grindelwald, apologized at the speed of light on the spot, but it was obviously too late. Facing Credence rushing towards him, Graves narrowed his eyes, but before he hit Graves, Credence turned his momentum and rushed out of the wall, sweeping the street outside into a mess. Even if you betrayed his trust, he still couldn't do it, Professor. Dumbledore looked at Grindelwald with a bit of condemnation in his eyes. It is really hard for Professor Grindelwald to refute it here. If Credence had rushed up directly, he could have killed him on the spot, but the other party just didn't have the heart to do it, which made him seem even more heartless. Although he really didn't care about this kind of thing at that time, he still cares about it now, or the life he wants to live now requires everyone to think that he cares about conscience. Thinking of this, Professor Grindelwald couldn't help but sigh again. The image problem after the movie is broadcast. It's difficult to deal with at this moment. Credence turned into Obscurus and wreaked havoc in New York. The four protagonists also saw this scene. Newt looked at the Aurors who came from all over after receiving the news, and seemed to have made some kind of determination. He turned around and handed the suitcase to Tina, telling her to help him take care of these magical animals if he never came back. He also entrusted his notes on magical animals to Tina. Tina was confused when she saw Newt disappear from the spot after apparition. She turned around and handed the suitcase and notes to Queenie and followed him. Queenie also wanted to learn to entrust things to Jacob, but was pulled by Jacob. He also wanted to go. He was worried about Queenie, and he was not afraid of danger. I can't take you there, it's too dangerous, Jacob didn't say anything, but Queenie's behavior undoubtedly reflected what Jacob was thinking. Queenie then turned her head to look at Jacob in surprise, and the camera quickly flashed through several scenes of the First World War. As a veteran of the First World War, Jacob might not be familiar with the battles of wizards, but if it comes to danger, the battlefields of wizards are not more dangerous than those of the First World War. In other words, there may be differences in the winning rate between battlefields for all forces, but for the soldiers who are specifically involved, any battlefield is the same and may be dangerous at any time. At least none of the soldiers in the First World War dared to say that they could crush the other side with zero casualties in any battle. Chapter 403, Magical Zoology. Isn't it magical? Queenie and Jacob were still fighting, while Tina and Newt had already caught up. Graves hadn't given up yet and was trying to persuade Credence to return to his command. Seeing this, Tina asked Newt to chase Obscurus while she went to delay Graves. Although Tina was once an Auror, her opponent was the more powerful Grindelwald. Even if Grindelwald still maintained his disguise and held a wand that didn't match him, Tina couldn't fight him. Fortunately, he didn't have time to waste with Tina now. After pulling a car and smashing it at Tina, Graves chased in the direction of Credence. At this moment, Newt had already chased Credence into the subway station. After arriving, Graves didn't go in directly, but used his identity to command the Aurors of the Magic Congress to block this place with a spell. The audience once again saw the familiar super armor protection, and the happy memories of Christmas could not help but surge into their hearts. Hard fists. Why do they have to stab them secretly here? After the Aurors completely blocked off the area, Graves told them not to let anyone go, and then he stepped into the subway station alone. However, when Graves entered the subway station, he saw Newt trying to steal his girlfriend, and it seemed that he was about to succeed. For a moment, Dumbledore's preference for Newt from the information he had seen before came to his mind. With the new and old hatreds added together, Graves gave Newt a silent lightning 5 whips on the spot. Professor Grindelwald? This is slander. Shameful slander. Looking at the flashback with strong implications, Professor Grindelwald was so anxious that he almost stood up. He didn't attack Newt because of the new and old hatreds at that time. In such an urgent situation at that time, he was just angry that Newt had interfered with his plan, and his plan was almost destroyed by Newt. This is slander. Why does he act like a love-brain person? Exclamation mark. However, when Professor Grindelwald glanced at Dumbledore's expression next to him, looking at the helpless face that showed a bit of tolerance after seeing the plot in the movie, Professor Grindelwald's fist that had just been clenched loosened again. Yes, that's right, he was jealous at the beginning in the screening room. Adam nodded as if he had expected this. See, he still has to thank me. He didn't know whether Professor Grindelwald was so love-brained at that moment, but he knew very well that Professor Grindelwald was indeed love-brained now, and he was a love-brained person who was severely stimulated by the sweet and loving state of himself and Dumbledore when he was young, especially since watching The Boy Who Lived series of movies. Professor Dumbledore and Professor Grindelwald seemed to have put down a lot of responsibilities and burdens, and even their love seemed to have signs of revival. It can be said to be a cause for celebration when Adam finds another opportunity to bring them together. Maybe the two pairs of Dumbledore and Grindelwald can be handled on the same day. At that time, we can just charge 2 sets of money to make a table of dishes and copy them. It will be so delicious. Not to mention Adam, who is calculating here. The plot on the screen has reached its climax when Credence lost control again. Tina arrived and successfully calmed Credence in the process of Tina accepting the death penalty. Everyone knew from her memory that the reason why Tina was removed from the Auror position was that she used magic on Muggles in order to save the abused Credence, so Credence trusted her more than he did Grindelwald at the beginning. At this time, Graves also let Tina negotiate with Credence, because he didn't want to see Credence really lose control and die. At least let him calm down before considering Credence's belonging. However, the people of the Magic Congress broke into the subway station at this time. Although Graves had ordered not to let anyone in before, now it was President Serafina who led the team in person. In the eyes of the audience, half sad and half expected, several spells hit Credence, and the Obscurus that had just covered the sky suddenly turned into flying ash and disappeared in front of everyone. From Newt's perspective, everyone knew that Credence was a poor man who was abused by his adoptive mother since childhood. No one would want to become an Obscurus, but because of the statute of secrecy, he was killed when he was about to be redeemed. What exactly are our laws protecting Graves? Words were a bit deafening. For a while, angry and disappointed, Graves wanted to leave while speaking words that were obviously in the style of Grindelwald's camp, but was stopped by Chairman Serafina. After turning around helplessly, Graves directly showed everyone what it means to single-handedly brush the Magic Congress. The dense rain of spells was blocked by raising his hand. Graves ignored the spells that attacked, walked towards the people of the Magic Congress, and counterattacked and knocked away several auras. However, Nit suddenly attacked from behind, and some magical plant directly bound Graves' hands, while Tina quickly used the disarming spell to confiscate Graves' wand. At this moment, Nit made a somewhat shocking move. He cast a true form on Graves. After a period of transformation, Graves' appearance changed drastically, revealing a face that everyone was somewhat familiar with. Professor Grindelwald, Harry, and Ron couldn't help but stare wide-eyed. The audience, who were somewhat fascinated by the movie, just remembered that it was said that Grindelwald and his friends had roles in this movie. However, after Grindelwald showed his true colors, he did not explode or resist as everyone imagined, but was taken away by the Aurors very obediently. But what he said before leaving always made people feel that he had something else to say. In any case, such a big villain who was defeated in one movie still surprised everyone. After arresting Grindelwald, there is still a big problem waiting for the Magical Congress of the United States to solve. Because of the Obscurus's disturbance, almost everyone in the city knew the existence of wizards, and the Magical Congress could not catch everyone and cast a forget spell. However, Nit had a suggestion that there was more than one way to make everyone forget the damage caused by the Obscurus. In addition to being an output, the curled winged demon he always carried with him could also make people forget bad memories for a period of time after dilution, and the Thunderbird could summon a rainstorm. So, in the shocked eyes of the audience, the Thunderbird soared into the sky, and heavy rain covered the entire city. But what about those who were not caught in the rain? Some viewers couldn't help but ask. But then everyone saw that people who were drinking water at home and those who were caught on the rain also fell into the same trance as those who were caught in the rain. Everyone then realized that the venom of the winged demon would be integrated into the water cycle of the entire city. Unless you don't touch a drop of water in New York in the next few days, you will be exposed to the venom of the winged demon. Oh my God. Is this magizoology? Harry opened his mouth wide after clearing the fourth area of the Forbidden Forest. He thought he had a good understanding of magical animals, but after watching this movie, he realized that his understanding of magizoology was still too shallow. Chapter 404, The venom of the curled-winged demon can only wash away bad memories. The heavy rain washed away everyone's memory. The Aurors collectively used the repair as original to repair all the damaged buildings, and also modified the content of the newspapers on the roadside. The method of using magizoology to wash away everyone's memory and the credit for capturing Grindelwald made Chairman Serafina turn a blind eye to Newt's previous crimes, including but not limited to Newt's smuggling of magical animals and a series of riots caused by the magical animals he released. But that's all. Newt needs to leave the United States as soon as possible, and there is still a problem that Chairman Serafina cannot give up. That is, the statute of confidentiality. As a nomad, Jacob cannot retain his memory of wizards and magic. Giving them some time to say goodbye is the biggest concession Chairman Serafina can give them within her personal authority. This is unreasonable. He and a wizard love each other, can't they get married, eh? Somewhat sentimental witch blew her nose and cried, no. Have you forgotten that at the beginning of the movie, when Newt talked about his understanding of the American wizarding world, he mentioned that the laws of the American Magical Congress do not allow muggles and wizards to marry. The wizard who said this also had a sad tone, but in addition there was a secret pride. Although the UK also insists on maintaining the statute of secrecy, at least in the UK, wizards can marry muggles. It's okay for marriage to be forced, but if both parties really love each other, they won't encounter such a tragedy of lovers becoming strangers. Unlike the United States, everyone can clearly feel the feelings between Jacob and Queenie during this process, but the two can only usher in the saddest ending in the end. Of course, when the movie comes to this point, although it feels that the laws here are more humane than those on the other side of the ocean, some people can't help but start thinking about the necessity and legitimacy of the existence of the statute of secrecy. Of course, it's not that they choose to embrace Grindelwald's ideas, but the statute of secrecy does seem to be a little behind the times. Times have changed, and it is becoming increasingly difficult for wizards to hide their existence. According to some movies in the dream cinema, muggles can now transmit messages to extremely far places in a short time, just like wizards. After a while, even the reign of thunderbirds may not be large enough. Those smart wizards can see that wizards will no longer be able to hide one day in the future, and this future may not be too far away. What should everyone do then? You can't pretend not to see it and leave it to fate, right? What's the difference between that and fudge? This question is what Adam wants everyone to think about. Adam, a wizard who can't see this problem, will also guide them to see it through newspapers. It doesn't matter what results they can think of. What's important is to make them aware of the existence of this problem first. When Jacob took the initiative to walk into the rain, Queenie couldn't help but walk up to him and gave him a deep kiss. When Jacob felt the temperature on his lips leave his mouth and opened his eyes, there was no trace of Newt and others in front of him. He turned around in a circle with some doubts, and then walked away with some disappointment. Everyone thought that he had lost his memory due to the influence of the venom of the curled-winged demon like everyone else. They were wondering why they were standing in the rain, and they couldn't help but feel sorry for the couple who had completely separated in this short movie. They also felt the personality charm of this muggle, and he was loved by a master of legitimacy, which obviously showed that he was a person who was consistent inside and outside. After losing Jacob, it was hard for Queenie to say whether she could find another good man who was not afraid of her legitimacy and was consistent inside and outside. Hearing the people around them sigh that such an excellent pair of lovers, who could even be said to be made in heaven, could not get together. Newt and Mrs. Tina had a subtle expression. It was impossible for them to stand up now and say that their sister and brother-in-law got together later. Not only that, this heavy rain did not wash away all of Jacob's memories of wizards. Everyone was amazed at the magic of the venom of the curled-winged demon, but ignored that the venom of the curled-winged demon could indeed make people lose their memories for a short period of time, but it could only make people lose those painful and bad memories. Other muggles only know that someone was killed by a wizard, that a wizard destroyed the city, etc. These memories can of course be easily washed away by the venom of the curled-winged demon, but for Jacob, during this period of time, he met a very good friend and a very beautiful girlfriend. This memory was not painful or bad in any way, so only part of the memory was washed away. For example, the memory of being almost taken as a target by an estrus horned beast, and so on. I guess Jacob was confused when he opened his eyes. His memory was not completely washed away. The intermittent memory was more confusing than being washed away. Looking at each other, Newt and Mrs. Tina had the same expression of crying and laughing. The matter was settled. Just when everyone thought the movie was over, the camera turned and Jacob walked out of an iron gate, wearing a work suit similar to the people crowded around him. But after walking out of the iron gate, Jacob was suddenly hit by a person who came out across, and the suitcase in his hand fell to the ground. Jacob was about to say a few words to the other party, but when he saw the back, he couldn't help but feel dazed. When he came to his senses, the other party had disappeared. Jacob shook his head and bent down to pick up the suitcase. However, the suitcase that was originally very easy to lift made Jacob unable to lift it this time, and he staggered. Instead, Jacob squatted down and opened the suddenly heavier box, but it was not what he had put in the box before. No matter what he had put in it before, it could not be a pile of silver eggshells. There were exclamations from all over the theater. Those were bird snake eggshells, and the action of changing the suitcase after the collision really made people smile, and couldn't help feeling a little sad. In addition to the silver eggshells, Jacob also found a note in the box. The note, signed by a kind person, told Jacob that he could take these bird snake eggshells to the bank as collateral to borrow enough money to open a bakery. Perhaps bird snake eggshells, which are obviously from the wizarding world, will attract the attention of the Aurors, but with a little investigation, it is not difficult to find out what happened to Jacob, and the Magical Congress of the United States will know who these bird snake eggshells came from. Newt and his team did not violate the confidentiality law, but only provided some financial assistance to Jacob. I think President Serafina, who had turned a blind eye before, would not pursue such a small issue after leaving a box of bird snake eggshells for Jacob. Nit should leave the United States. The extra ropes on the suitcase made the audience who noticed it couldn't help but laugh. Before boarding the ship, Nit turned his head and looked at Tina, who came to see him off. Why? Even this part, Newt couldn't help but widen his eyes. His whole face flushed, and it was getting redder and redder. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405. You don't have to say anything. I have made up my mind. At the end of the movie, Nit showed everyone what a confession without words is. Every sentence is not a confession, but a confession. The implicit and lingering tug-of-war between him and Tina made the audience couldn't help but smile sweetly. Newt and Mrs. Tina looked at the screen with sweet nostalgia and shyness. The only pity is that the two have not really been together yet. Newt boarded the ship and returned to England, and Tina returned to her position as an Auror thanks to Newt. However, everyone was not too worried. Unlike Queenie and Jacob, who no one had heard of, Newt and Tina were a couple who were quite famous. Especially the audience who had rushed to watch the premiere would definitely do some homework before watching. At the end of the movie, a special shot was left for Jacob. His shop was very popular, and what surprised the audience was that his bread shape contained a lot of magical animal elements. This actually hinted that Jacob had not forgotten everything, especially at the end. Jacob looked up and saw Queenie, who came to buy bread. He suddenly reached out and covered the wound on his neck in a trance. It was the bite of the Murtra rat. At that time, looking at Jacob, Queenie's smile seemed to have a deeper meaning. Did she see that Jacob had not forgotten his memory completely? However, the hints and foreshadowing of the movie ended here, and more will be left for the next one. Seeing a short advertisement at the end of the movie, the advertisement of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the audience immediately showed a complicated expression. Come again? Exclamation mark. The previous The Boy Who Lived series gave them PTSD. Although this movie is different from the previous ones in The Boy Who Lived series, it is also warm to watch, so the series will not be the same as before, and suddenly give everyone knives at the end. How could it be? Standing up from the small sofa, Adam left a subtle smile and disappeared in the screening room. Regardless of any bad premonitions about the development of the next movie, everyone's expectations for the next movie remain the same. After all, this movie is strictly a documentary, and it shows stories from the past. When everyone stood up and left, they couldn't help but discuss the plot of the movie. Compared with other audiences, the atmosphere on Ron and Harry's side was more complicated. Theirs. Also, a next movie, Ron's face was bitter. This movie can only be said to hint that Queenie is a natural telepath without saying it explicitly, but the next one is uncertain. Damn, if he had known earlier, he wouldn't have made such a big bet. Ron, we must go to the premiere together when the time comes. I can't wait to see it. In order not to disturb others, they walked out of the cinema in silence. When they parted, Harry couldn't help but laugh. He patted Ron on the shoulder and then paraded away. I don't know if what he couldn't wait to see is the next movie or Ron dancing in Ginny's skirt or both. There were still relatively few people who left directly like them, and more people surrounded the peripheral store of the fantasy cinema as usual. The peripherals of the movie will be put on the shelves after the premiere, and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is a reality series like The Boy Who Lived. So of course there are also commemorative cards for sale, whether it is cute magical animals such as the Niffler, the bird snake, and the invisible beast, or the main characters such as Newt and Queenie. Basically no one is dissatisfied with the commemorative cards, and compared with the unpopular villains in the previous sets of commemorative cards, the villains in this movie are much better, in addition to Credence's vicious adoptive mother. Both the Credence card that can turn into Obscurus and the Grindelwald card that can change between Graves and Grindelwald are very popular. At least no one was hurt to sell these two cards on the spot. Not everyone is rushing to collect the whole set to exchange for gold cards. There are also audiences who only want to like the characters. On the other hand, Harry, who left early, was in a very good mood. The main reason was that Ginny came back from the Holyhead Harpy team training today. For this reason, he went to the boutique department store in Diagon Alley to buy some daily necessities such as aromatherapy that he could not use at home alone. If nothing unexpected happens, he should be able to have a hearty dinner tonight. It should be so. However, after returning home in the evening, Harry only saw half a piece of bacon, sausage and potato pizza that was already a little cold, and a note on the table. Harry? ? The note was left by Ginny. After she had eaten the pizza, she went shopping with Hermione, Luna and others, and asked Harry to solve the dinner by himself and wait for her to come back. Originally, Harry didn't think there was anything wrong. Ginny was just going out to play with her girlfriends, but that night, when he saw Ginny coming home with a lot of clothes and skirts in her hands, especially when Ginny put on some of them to let him see how they looked, Harry broke out in a cold sweat on the spot. It's not that Ginny doesn't look good in these clothes. Ginny looks good in anything she wears. But the problem now is that the person who wears these tight skirts, backless skirts, fishtail skirts, dresses, in the future may not be Ginny. Ron. Danger. What is even more frightening is that it is difficult to tell whether this crisis comes more from wearing Ginny's dress in Hogsmeade, or from Ginny's new dress after it burst. More, for some reason, a scene suddenly flashed through Harry's mind. Ginny, wearing a Quidditch uniform, swung her bat and hit Ron on the head. When the bat collided with Ron's head, it made the same crisp sound as when she hit the quaffle sound. Harry swallowed hard. Otherwise, he should agree to Ron's surrender, right? No. It's impossible. I've thought about it clearly. If you're willing to gamble, you have to admit defeat, too. Weeks later, when Harry mentioned this matter, Ron blocked Harry's words with a wave of his hand. Although he was timid at first, he thought about it carefully after he returned and decided that he was willing to admit defeat. After all, you can't keep your word, and the most important thing is that he suddenly remembered that with Ginny's character. In addition to the dress used as pajamas, he even doubted whether Ginny had a skirt. It's really not worth it to keep talking for the sake of this not particularly serious consequence. No, the situation has changed. I want to say, you don't need to say anything. I've made up my mind. Do you think I'm the kind of person who can't afford to lose? You just look down on me. Seeing Ron's righteous words, Harry also felt angry. It was a damned thing that he couldn't persuade with good words, thinking that Ginny wouldn't actually kill Ron even if she was angry when she saw it. Harry simply stopped mentioning it, and the two of them walked into the screening room and sat down in silence. Chapter 406 Animaguses, Snap. Huh? Found it, the seat is here, Professor. Scamander's son and daughter-in-law took Newt and Mrs. Tina to sit at the corresponding seat on the ticket, and then took the exchange ticket to go outside to exchange it. Sit down. When you find a place to exchange things and come back, the movie will be over. MRS. Tina rolled her eyes at her son. I should have let Rolf and Luna accompany us. Hill. Scamander couldn't help but smile guiltily in the face of his mother's disdain. After the release of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, his colleagues talked to him about his parents after watching the movie, and he couldn't answer at all, and the atmosphere became a little awkward for a while, so he thought about buying a ticket to watch it. God knows why it is so hard to get movie tickets on weekends. Going directly to ask his parents seemed like he didn't care about his parents' past before, and it seemed that his sudden concern now was a bit utilitarian, so this time he took a special leave to accompany his parents to watch the premiere. But the process. He had never been to a movie before, and he was not as familiar with the dream cinema as Newt and Mrs. Tina. The four of them sat in their seats for a while, But now there were still several minutes before the movie started, so they just sat there. Just when Hill's forehead was sweating from embarrassment, Professor Scamander, Mrs. Tina, long time no see, Adam, came over with some food, drinks and bags of peripheral gifts. After greeting the two, Adam also nodded to Hill and Scamander. Hill and Adam had met once before, but Adam had never seen Mrs. Scamander before. Adam? Why are you here? Newt wanted to stand up in surprise, but Adam stopped him with a gesture. It's okay, I just heard that the movie is about to start, and the gifts prepared for you haven't been taken away, so I came to see. This Mr. Scamander doesn't seem to be very familiar with the cinema. Adam stretched out his hand, and the exchange ticket flew from Hill's pocket to his hand. The exchange items are all here, taking the exchange ticket, Adam said to Professor Scamander, who seemed to want to say a few words to him. After watching the movie, Professor Scamander, do you mind going to the Storm restaurant with me for dinner? Of course, Mrs. Tina can come. After the first movie was released, Nit wrote to Adam to talk to him about the movie. I think he probably wanted to ask Adam how he knew those things. Adam thought it would be better to wait until the second part was finished. As for the third part, although the clips about Professor Dumbledore and Professor Grindelwald are quite interesting, and the plot of The Chosen Melon is also great, the overall quality is still lower than the first two. This made Adam feel conflicted about whether to bring this one here as well. Even if he did, he would need to make some changes. After all, it was a movie, and it wasn't the first time that it didn't completely conform to reality. It just so happened that the world's #1, well, the National Wushu Championship was about to start. Let's wait until he came back from China to decide how to change it. After a brief chat with Professor Scamander and Mrs. Tina, Adam left when the movie was about to start. It seems that he has been paying attention to this side, or everyone. After Adam left, Mrs. Tina suddenly said, Adam is a screenwriter, and it's normal for him to pay attention to everyone's reaction to the premiere, right? Yeah, that's true, MRS. Tina didn't pay too much attention to this aspect, but just sighed that Adam really cared about them. In addition, since Adam might be watching, she might have to restrain her expression after a popular advertisement, accompanied by the logo of the Dream Cinema. The movie slowly kicked off. At the beginning of the movie, everyone saw Grindelwald sitting on a chair with his hair loose, and looking around. He seemed to be in a cell. At the end of the last movie, Grindelwald was imprisoned by the American Magical Congress, and now it is obviously the story that connects to that. But what is a little worrying is that Grindelwald confidently asked President Serafina, do you think you can lock me up? Before that, newspapers and magic ministries of various countries mentioned that Grindelwald had a history of escaping from prison. Considering the ability shown by the American Magical Congress in the last movie, it is hard for the audience to believe that nothing will happen. At this moment, the camera turned, and a small flying insect was flying around the light bulb above Grindelwald. Fans who have watched the Boy Who Lived series couldn't help but have an idea. Animagus. Originally, Animagus was not a direction that was easily suspected. There were only a few registered personnel in the entire British wizarding world, and it was very difficult to practice this magic. But look at the Boy Who Lived series. Illegal Animagus may be rare, but it is definitely not non-existent, and it is not rare to the point of being rare. It just depends on whether there is a demand. Grindelwald has several illegal Animagus under his command. Is that strange? Even Azkaban can be escaped with Animagus. The Nurmengard where Grindelwald was finally imprisoned is just as famous as Azkaban. Of course, it was the Azkaban in the past. Perhaps this time Grindelwald escaped with the help of this subordinate who can turn into a flying insect, with a whisper. This speculation spread, and some people even began to assume that the man must be an Animagus, and began to speculate Grindelwald's escape route to their companions. Not to mention, some of the ways were really a bit punishable. Then they saw the flying Animagus insect flying to Grindelwald's side and crashing into a red magic barrier that suddenly appeared. I tell you, that flying insect must be an Animagus, and Animagus is Pa. The flying insect slowly fell with only one wing left. The audience who was giving science education to their companions, pupils trembled. If the audience who was being educated by their companions, stunned JPG. Obviously, it was just an ordinary flying insect, and the scene of crashing into this magic barrier undoubtedly showed that Grindelwald was under close surveillance. So an audience member who had just guessed wrong and lost face in front of his companions said angrily, if the protection is really strict, can a small flying insect fly to Grindelwald? In this prison with so many loopholes, Grindelwald will definitely escape in a minute. That's right, as long as two people come, Grindelwald will definitely get out directly. In the corner of the screening room, Professor Grindelwald, who was highly expected by everyone, suddenly slowly typed a question mark at this moment. It seemed that the magic barrier was triggered because of the outside sensing that the observation window on the cell door was opened, revealing a pair of eyes at the same time. Chairman Serafina and a middle-aged man were walking towards the direction of the cell. From their conversation, it seemed that other European magic ministries were planning to transfer Grindelwald to other places for trial. When they heard what they said, a crisp voice suddenly rang out in the screening room. It was a wizard who slapped his thigh excitedly. It may not be possible to keep him locked up all the time, and he dared to transfer him out. Then Grindelwald ran away as soon as he stepped out of the prison door. Chapter 407. How can you escape from prison if you are not in prison? Newt and Lady Tina watched the screen intently. They knew that Grindelwald had successfully escaped from prison, but they really didn't know how he escaped from prison as everyone expected. Just keeping Grindelwald in one place is already a difficult task, according to what Chairman Serafina told the senior European Ministry of Magic official. Grindelwald's magic was so powerful that they had to strengthen guarding measures, such as the magic barrier around Grindelwald. In addition, Grindelwald was also extremely good at deceiving people. After 3 batches of guards, they had to remove Grindelwald's tongue initially. Some viewers thought that Mancuso had gone too far and would not cut out mortal tongues no matter what. But when Grindelwald was transferred, fanatical cheers came from the prisons in all directions, making them swallow their saliva. This is a completely different feeling from Voldemort. Voldemort brought his Death Eaters with him, which brought a very direct fear of death and pain to people. This fear came from Voldemort's power. But when Voldemort lost power, the Death Eaters immediately fell and dispersed. Grindelwald is different. In this scene, he is clearly imprisoned, floating in the air with his hands behind his back, but there are still countless people calling his name feverishly. People can't help but think about how Grindelwald did it. Of this, it's scary to think about it carefully, but it's nothing more than this. Finally, Grindelwald was transferred to a carriage pulled by the Thestrals, and there were no other prisoners around him shouting his name. The carriage rushed into the rainy night, and the Yuki soared away in the air. However, in the portal that the carriage rushed out of before, a wizard once again walked out. He looked at the carriage slowly going away, and a magic wand appeared in his hand. It's the Elder Wand. With the popularity of the Boy Who Lived series, everyone knows that the Elder Wand was once in Grindelwald's hands. After he was defeated by Professor Dumbledore, the Elder Wand became Professor Dumbledore's wand. In other words, at this moment, the Elder Wand is Grindelwald's wand. That man, a prison employee, was also a follower of Grindelwald? But according to what Chairman Serafina said before, 3 waves of personnel have been replaced here, and even Grindelwald's tongue has been removed. With a muffled exclamation, the wizard apparated and disappeared, and when he reappeared, he was already clinging to the bottom of the carriage. The camera turned to the interior of the carriage. The senior official of a certain European Ministry of Magic was holding a shining silver pendant in his hand, mocking Grindelwald for his difficulty in escaping. This time opposite him, Grindelwald was still restrained, with 2 Aurors pointing their wands at him at all times. Grindelwald didn't answer him. By the way, he was still in the state of having his tongue removed at this time, so of course he couldn't answer. But with a flash of white light, just like a bolt of lightning, Grindelwald suddenly widened his eyes and his face changed slightly. In full view of the public, Grindelwald's appearance suddenly changed into that of the Magic Congress employee who was guarding him outside the cell just now, because not long ago. Everyone still remembers that this person is Tina and Queenie's boss in the previous movie, Abernathy, who once accosted Queenie. This sudden change caught all the audience off guard. It turned out that Grindelwald was not in the cell at all. He had escaped from prison long ago. Wait, since Grindelwald is not here, the wizard who just held the Elder Wand, sure enough, the face of the wizard caught under the carriage also changed. His white hair and strange-colored pupils clearly revealed his identity. Professor Dumbledore did not expect that Grindelwald had escaped from prison at this moment. He thought it was Grindelwald's men who came to give him the Elder Wand. Glancing in Grindelwald's direction in surprise, Professor Dumbledore found that there was not much pride on his face at this time, but rather, unhappy. Once again, he apparated to the top of the carriage. With a flick of his wand, Grindelwald knocked all the wizards driving the carriage out of the air and sat in front of the carriage. In the carriage, as soon as the senior official of the Ministry of Magic, who discovered that the other party was not Grindelwald, took out his wand, he found that his and the other 2 Aurors' wands had been reduced to ashes under the influence of unknown spells. This the strength of Professor Grindelwald. Harry's face was full of admiration. No wonder he uses auras as the unit of measurement when he teaches us. Harry recalled it, and it seemed that Professor Grindelwald had not cast any spells since he appeared in the movie. All the spells were cast silently, and there were even wandless flying spells, floating spells, etc. No, Harry, don't you feel terrible? Ron looked at Harry with some confusion. According to an interview with the Daily Prophet, at least the plots in Fantastic Beasts actually happened. Grindelwald, Professor, he really did these things. No, didn't he say that when he gave us the first lesson? Faced with Harry's obvious expression, Ron couldn't help but choke. Although what you said makes sense, but now that you have really seen with your own eyes how terrifying Grindelwald was before, you don't even feel any lingering fear. Don't worry. No matter how scary Professor Grindelwald was in the past, wasn't he defeated by Professor Dumbledore later? And now there is Professor Gandalf. Harry waved his hand with a look of relief. He was not completely relieved about Professor Grindelwald, but he was more relieved about Professor Dumbledore and Professor Gandalf. Hearing what Harry said, Ron was really relieved. You make sense. In the carriage, the 4 people without wands and a sheep-eating beast directly wrestled into a ball. Without wands, they did not master such advanced skills as wandless spellcasting, so the way of fighting was also very primitive. Punching, kicking, and even biting were used in this process. The audience couldn't help but notice that the man and beast on Grindelwald's side seemed to be very concerned about the silver pendant that was held in the hands of a senior official of the Ministry of Magic before. What exactly was that? Looking at the pendant, Professor Dumbledore's expression was a bit complicated. He seemed to know why Grindelwald looked unhappy after driving the carriage up and down and dealing with the pursuers on flying broomsticks. Grindelwald turned over and entered the carriage, and took back the pendant from Abernathy's mouth after comforting the sheep-eater that was originally used to guard him but had already been turned against him. Grindelwald threw the sheep-eater out of the carriage. Seeing this scene, Nit pounded the armrest twice in grief, and at the same time, he was more convinced that Grindelwald deserved to have his blood alliance stolen by the Niffler. Sneeze. Unable to help but sneeze, Professor Grindelwald's already ugly face suddenly became uglier. Chapter 408. Hearings are not the same for each person. Restore the tongue that Abernathy lost for him, and leave another person alive to spread the news of his successful escape from prison. After doing all this, Grindelwald, who had been dormant for half a year, officially announced his return as this Grindelwald. After watching Grindelwald's escape from prison, the whole process of leaving the prison, the audience sighed. Although Grindelwald seemed to be taken away without any resistance at the end of the previous part, it now seems that the other party may just think it is unnecessary after all. Grindelwald has been in prison for only half a year, and he has replaced himself with the staff of the Magic Congress who guarded him. In fact, it is hard to say whether he was in prison for a month. In addition, during this process, Grindelwald secretly and openly instigated countless staff of the Magic Congress to rebel. Considering that Grindelwald quietly replaced Graves, a senior official of the Magic Congress, perhaps this is just part of Grindelwald's plan. At the same time, some people couldn't help but secretly curse the MACUSA. They thought that the request of the European Magic Ministries to transfer Grindelwald was the key to Grindelwald's escape, but now it seems that he can leave at any time. The reason why he has not left the prison may be another conspiracy. If it weren't for the transfer trial, the fact that the imprisoned Grindelwald was bound to be exposed, interrupting his plan in advance, maybe he would stay in prison and undermine the entire MACUSA without the chairman knowing it. Hearing this, Nit couldn't help but look at Mrs. Tina beside him. As expected, Mrs. Tina's expression was very angry, but he couldn't refute it because what she said was the truth. Of course, the British Ministry of Magic was also very bad when facing Voldemort, and it was even worse than the MACUSA when facing Grindelwald. But wouldn't it be a comparison of the bad? The badness of the British Ministry of Magic can't make the performance of the MACUSA look good. The words 3 months later flashed on the screen, indicating that 3 months had passed since Grindelwald escaped from prison, and the location in the shot was also moved to the British Ministry of Magic. At this time, the British Ministry of Magic was still using owls to send letters, and the owl's feces would fall at any time. This made some viewers with good memories a little excited. In The Boy Who Lived, Arthur Weasley mentioned this when he saw the paper plane that delivered the message from the Ministry of Magic and the British Ministry of Magic. Nit met his first love, Leta Lestrange, which made Mrs. Tina couldn't help but turn her eyes to Newt. It's not that she would doubt Newt's feelings for her at an old age, but seeing her husband and his first love, Bai Yu Guang, appear in the same place, no woman would be happy and would want to see her husband's reaction especially. Although it's a bit unpleasant to say, the lethality of the dud by Yu Guang is often greater, and in a sense, even impeccable Newt couldn't help but feel a little dazed when he looked at Lita on the screen. Even if he put aside the relationship of being a secret crush, Lita was his prospective sister-in-law, and she took good care of him. At the beginning, Lita's death can be said to be the direct reason why he firmly embarked on the road to fight against Grindelwald. Newt came to the British Ministry of Magic not to see Rita, nor to see his brother, but to apply for leaving the country. Obviously the previous accident in New York still caused him some trouble, and through Newt's oral statement in the movie, this is not the first time he has come to the Ministry of Magic to apply for leaving the country, but the fourth time. Like the previous 3 times, the Ministry of Magic was cold to Newt's application to leave the country. After all, it was less than a year since Newt caused a big mess in New York. If it weren't for the fact that the person who presided over the trial and convicted him was Grindelwald in disguise, so that the Magic Congress didn't want to mention the trial at all, and he also played a key role in the capture of Grindelwald, he would never have thought of leaving the United States so easily. However, Newt filed 4 applications in less than a year, which also showed Newt's determination on this matter, and considering that Newt has an older brother who is regarded as a war hero, the Ministry of Magic proposed a solution, which is to let Newt join the Ministry of Magic and assign him to his brother in this way. Even if the ban on Newt is lifted, the British Ministry of Magic will not appear too unprincipled. After all, in name, Newt is under the jurisdiction of the British Ministry of Magic when he leaves the country, and in reality, there is almost no restriction on Newt. His own brother is in charge of him. And the effectiveness of this restriction can be said to be basically entirely dependent on the brother's self-consciousness. Oh my God, is this what it feels like to have someone in the Ministry of Magic? Harry, who had been forced to attend hearings at the Ministry of Magic several times and suffered from the pain of having no connections in the Ministry of Magic, envied him from the bottom of his heart. Ron wanted to say that this was not the case. His father and brother both worked in the Ministry of Magic, but he had never experienced the so-called someone in the Ministry of Magic feeling. In fact, Arthur Weasley's position still brought them a lot of convenience, and he also had a lot of connections, but Ron could not clearly know which things around him were due to his having someone in the Ministry of Magic. It's just that Percy is really impartial and has not used his position to provide any convenience outside the rules for his family. He even deliberately avoids suspicion from his family, unaware of Ron's slander beside him. Harry looked at the screen and couldn't help but fall into memories. See what his hearing was like, sitting alone on a bench, surrounded by a group of cold-faced Wizengamot members. Fudge right in front of him was telling his crime one by one without listening to his explanation. Let's look at Newt's hearing again. There were only 4 people besides him, one of whom was his brother, and these 4 people were sitting at the same table with him, and the Ministry of Magic even offered to make concessions. Look at the kind expressions on those people's faces when they talk. Harry couldn't help but take a sip of Coke. For some reason, a sour taste that was different from before spread between his lips and teeth. However, faced with such conditions, Newt still gave his answer. No. Harry couldn't help but wrinkle his face. Why did the Coke in his mouth become sour? The reason Newt gave was that, unlike his brother, he didn't have the talent to be an orator. Newt has shown before that he has a sharp thinking that is different from his expressive ability. Obviously he understands the implication of the Ministry of Magic officials, but he still rejected the offer with a superficial meaning of business. It can be said to be the recruitment of pie trading. Chapter 409, Reputation that Cannot Be Saved. Hearing Newt's refusal, the expressions of the people in the British Ministry of Magic were not as friendly as before, but for various reasons, such as Theseus, and Theseus, and so on, they still persuaded Newt again. In particular, the previous emphasized that Grindelwald's influence is becoming more and more powerful, and the previous Obscurial has always been used as a killer by Grindelwald. In addition to the powerful magical power of the Obscurial itself, Credence's tragic experience is indeed a powerful weapon to provoke wizards' hatred of Muggles. Newt noticed something wrong in the tone of the people in the Ministry of Magic. Credence should have died. Why did the tone of the people in the Ministry of Magic sound as if he was still alive? It turned out that Newt was indeed sharp enough. Theseus told Newt a piece of news that was neither good nor bad. Credence was not dead. At the end of the last movie, there was a close-up. After Credence was blown to ashes, a piece of ashes floated higher and higher, and finally floated out of the subway station, but no one felt anything wrong at the time. If you watch the second part and then look back at that scene, you will find that the ash did not disappear until the end. According to the Ministry of Magic, Credence is now a living example that is beneficial to Grindelwald, and they need Newt to find him and kill him, knowing that Credence is just a poor man used by Grindelwald. Newt certainly cannot agree to such a thing, even if it is a pretense. He is unwilling, and his application to leave the country is naturally broken again. Theseus was very helpless about his brother's stubbornness, and chased out to explain the pros and cons to Newt, and said that the situation is tense now, and that letting Newt join the Ministry of Magic just now was actually in order to make him stand on the side. Stand opposite Grindelwald. Newt said very directly that he was very clear about the filth hidden behind these things, but he didn't want to stand on the side whether it was the relationship between wizards and muggles or the statute of secrecy, or the intrigues hidden under the flags of both sides. He was not interested, he just wanted to stay out of it and study the magical animals he liked. Professor Scamander sighed at his young self on the screen. He was too young back then. What Theseus said was right. When the situation develops to a certain extent, everyone must stand on the side, otherwise both sides will tacitly clear the third party first, so as to avoid the two sides fighting to the end and the other side taking advantage. Newt's influence was not great at the time, but he was Theseus's younger brother. Although not many, there would still be eyes on him, and neither side would let him put up the flag of staying out of the matter. In addition, Newt did not think at the time that he was not alone. He could choose not to stand on the side. Could his relatives, friends and lovers also not stand on the side? But in the movie, Newt was obviously still in the stage of being hot-blooded and irreconcilable with the world's filth. Theseus, who looked like my brother's rebellion broke my heart, had no choice but to give him a hug. Through this hug, Theseus told Newt that he was being monitored now. Since Newt refused to join the Ministry of Magic, he could only help Newt in a limited way. Apart from these intelligence tips, if Newt caused any trouble, he could still help with his accumulation and popularity in the Ministry of Magic. On the other hand, because of Newt's ignorance, the task of finding and solving Credence was handed over to Grimson. Everyone's first reaction when seeing this person was, this guy doesn't look like a good person. Although his hair was very smooth and he was wearing a suit, he just gave off an awkward feeling of a mouse wearing gold clothes. In fact, this person's identity is a magical animal hunter. This profession usually helps people hunt and solve magical animals. Of course, when necessary, it can also provide customers with some services related to magical animals that are not convenient to see in the light, such as poaching, and the like. This can well explain why Newt turned around and left when he saw him for the first time. As a magical animal scientist, Newt hates this kind of people the most. In addition to Newt's obvious indifference to Grimson, it can be seen that the attitude of the Ministry of Magic towards him is obviously not as good as that towards Newt. Compared with Newt, who knows the background and is endorsed by Theseus, such a guy with a gray and black identity is not only not so trustworthy in terms of position, but even using him will damage the face of the Ministry of Magic. Choosing him is also a helpless move of the Ministry of Magic after being rejected by Newt. At this moment, substituting simple values, the audience still generally supports Newt. After all, for such things that may lead to war, most people's instinctive reaction is to stay out of it, and for this kind of pie transaction, when it is not their turn, everyone is generally more willing to see others refuse it righteously. In this way, Newt's current situation was explained through this hearing, and the camera turned to Grindelwald walking on the streets of Paris. Grindelwald looked vigorous in a fashionable outfit of marten boots and windbreaker, without any embarrassment after just being in prison for half a year, and he was accompanied by a very beautiful lady on the other side. Grindelwald's men quickly completed the one-stop service from casting the killing curse to burying the other party. Grindelwald happened to move into someone else's mansion as a temporary base. This understated cruelty made many viewers gasp, and made their own contribution to global warming. Grindelwald's cruelty was not limited to this. In his conversation with his subordinates, he revealed that if his plan succeeded, millions of people would be displaced, but Grindelwald casually brushed it off and said that all they wanted was freedom. As previously revealed by the media, Grindelwald's slogan at the time was that everything was for the greater good. At this moment, a baby's voice interrupted their communication. Professor. Grindelwald couldn't help but pinch his eyebrows. Adam really knew the key points. It seemed that his reputation was completely unnecessary to save. Killing babies is really a cruel crime that anyone who agrees with universal values cannot accept. After this segment is broadcast, his reputation will be visibly stinking. Adam knew very well about Professor Grindelwald's current state, and most of this was deliberately done by him. It has to be said that Professor Grindelwald's eloquence is indeed a bit too good, So good that Adam is a little worried that his reputation in the next generation of the wizarding world will become better and better. He is happy to see Professor Grindelwald and Professor Dumbledore end their lives after they are over 100 years old, but it would be very troublesome if they suddenly have the urge to do something evil at such an old age. After all, it was his idea to let Grindelwald teach at Hogwarts. And Adam should also bear some responsibility for the evil that this old man created, so he deliberately preserved these past of Grindelwald, so that Grindelwald would not have the possibility of doing other unnecessary things except accepting labor reform at Hogwarts. Chapter 410. He is C.P.ing you. Since Adam vigorously advocated changes in the wizarding world, Adam not only shouldered the full responsibility for the consequences, but at least had the awareness to take precautions and deal with them after the fact. In fact, the umbrella parties in various places are doing this kind of thing now. If it were not for the problems that may arise due to economic invasion in various places, there would be no need for Adam to let people set up local companies and just open the door and let free trade. It's over. In addition, I happened to discuss this matter with the office when I went to watch the National Wushu Championship. His thoughts wandered for a moment, and Adam's attention returned to the screening room, especially the source of his happiness. Harry and Ron looked at the screen with ugly expressions on their faces. Even Harry, who had been calm before, was a little unbearable now. After all, whether the law of secrecy should be changed has always been controversial in the wizarding world with the development of science and technology. Grindelwald could not have inspired so many people to follow him back then by confusing right and wrong and avoiding the important. The reason why those followers have such high loyalty is because they really agree with the Grindelwald's ideas to bring a future to the wizards with credence as a living example. Harry is not radical enough to agree that Grindelwald wants to break the secrecy law, but he can also accept that Grindelwald has caused turmoil. But this does not mean that he can accept Grindelwald taking action against a baby like this. This has nothing to do with whether he is against the secrecy law or not. It is purely anti-human. Professor Dumbledore turned his head and glanced at Grindelwald, who was speechless. It must be said that his mood slightly improved, and at this time he also breathed a sigh of relief. At least he didn't have to worry that Adam would be as inhumane as Grindelwald and not treat muggles as human beings. Looking back, Professor Dumbledore was surprised to find that, it seemed that it was his part, after using mist to cover London. Dumbledore and Newt kept moving while talking to ensure their communication was not discovered and eavesdropped through the exchange between Dumbledore and Newt. The audience learned that the reason why Newt learned about Frank Thunderbird was Dumbledore who revealed it to him. This was also the direct reason why Newt went to New York. In other words, Newt's trip to New York at that point in time was actually facilitated by Dumbledore. So the question is, did Dumbledore know that Grindelwald was planning to cause trouble at Bancusa? No matter how Dumbledore answers this question, Newt and the audience have their own answers. No matter what the audience thinks, Newt feels that Dumbledore did it on purpose. I still think he did it on purpose, Professor. Scamander suddenly turned to Mrs. Tina and whispered. Mrs. Tina nodded in agreement. Dumbledore avoided talking about whether he had intentionally revealed the information to Newt before, but instead used the legend of their family and the Phoenix to explain it away. Entering an empty bus, Dumbledore told Newt Credence's current intelligence and gave him the location of a safe house in Paris. According to Dumbledore, there is an old friend of his there, and if Newt is in danger during the operation, he can try to go there for help. Newt, who didn't agree to go to Credence at all? Seeing Dumbledore, who had just said that he had entrusted this task to him, Newt quickly chased after him to express his position. He has not yet been lifted from the ban, and if he really wanted to find Credence and get involved in this matter, then he had directly agreed to the Ministry of Magic in this regard. Dumbledore still did not answer Newt directly, but instead mentioned why he liked Newt, because what he did had nothing to do with fame and fortune. He only cared about whether the thing itself was correct, and he only cared about his own heart. It's like Newt could have used his brother's relationship with the Ministry of Magic to get an exit permit first, but he decisively refused. Newt was better than anyone Dumbledore had ever known in this regard. After listening to Dumbledore's extremely serious words, Professor Grindelwald's fist holding the Elder Wand hardened. Speaking of which, his reputation is going to be completely ruined now. It seems that it is not impossible to suddenly go crazy and kill Newt in front of him. However, Grindelwald still had some sanity left, and knew that Adam must be watching here. Let alone killing Newt and leaving after that, he would not even have the chance to attack Newt. Professor Grindelwald couldn't help but sigh. Although Dumbledore's words were sincere, Newt was not a savior who would go to the big devil to challenge him after being praised a few times. Harry, sitting in the front row, Newt, who has always been very perceptive, could tell at a glance that Dumbledore was pursuing him, so he asked Dumbledore a fatal question. You said it well, You are right, this is a just thing. Then why don't you go yourself but let me go? Aren't you the person you say you don't care about fame and fortune? So what are the benefits of asking me to do this, as long as his relatives, friends and magical animals are not involved? Newt is indeed a rare sober person, and he knows that if he wants to stay out of the situation, he must not be too enthusiastic. Facing Newt's fatal question, Dumbledore was silent for a moment and then said, "Because I can't take action against Grindelwald." Adam thought that Professor Grindelwald would feel better after seeing this, but he unexpectedly found that his mood became worse instead. Oh, by the way, the blood pact was broken. Later, back to the movie, Dumbledore played hard to get in the end, and directly controlled Newt, who was indeed a good person inside. Harry smacked his lips. Why did this scene look so familiar? This ability to calculate everyone's reaction accurately. Did Professor Dumbledore have it so long ago? Not to mention how Newt felt when he was played around by Professor Dumbledore. When the camera followed Newt back to his home, the audience's mood suddenly jumped up. The three cute little nifflers directly dispelled the serious atmosphere created by all the previous movie content, and a chorus of "oh" rang out in the screening room. Since the broadcast of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, these extremely cute magical animals have attracted the love of countless wizards who have been melted by cuteness. However, considering that the habits of this magical animal are not suitable for most wizard families to raise, and the raising and abandoning craze of Akita dogs caused by Hachiko, a dog's story in his previous life, Adam deliberately restricted the stores that sell magical animals. Everyone must think twice before raising a niffler. Don't just buy it impulsively based on its appearance. If you abandon it in the end because you think it is not suitable, it will hurt the niffler. If you just think the niffler is cute, you can definitely consider the niffler peripherals of the Dream Cinema. Especially now that there is a limited time event, if you buy a certain amount of niffler peripherals, you will definitely get a niffler commemorative card. Chapter 411. The nature of human beings is indeed. If the nifflers just now brought everyone a small surprise, then Queenie and Jacob, who appeared later, brought everyone a big surprise. We had discussed this couple long before, that is, since the American Magic Congress would not allow Queenie and Jacob to be together, why didn't they come to the UK? The laws of the British Ministry of Magic allow Muggles to retain their memories of the wizarding world if they become married to wizards, and with the popularity of Jacob's bakery at the end of the film and Queenie's superb magic of making bread, there is no need to worry about survival in the UK. But now it seems, they really did it? Exclamation mark. Unlike other audiences who were surprised, Professor Scamander and Mrs. Tina sighed at the same time, but they soon couldn't concentrate on sighing for their sister and brother-in-laws. Past seeing Queenie and Jacob coming, Newt was very surprised, and then he passed the two to see where Tina was, but Tina didn't come. Newt's surprised expression suddenly disappeared. Mrs. Tina couldn't help but look at her husband beside her, while Professor Scamander turned his head to look at the popcorn bucket on the other side. During the conversation, Queenie revealed that the two of them came to see Newt alone because they were in a cold war with Tina, and Tina was in a bad mood recently. In addition to the couple who violated the laws of the Magic Congress of the United States, Newt also accounted for a large part of the reason. Tina saw the report about Mr. Scamander and his fiancée. The attached picture is a photo of Theseus and Rita attending Newt's new book launch. Newt was full of injustice when he heard this. Mr. Scamander, who is engaged, was his brother Theseus. His love for Tina is clear to see. Although she later knew the truth of this misunderstanding, Mrs. Tina still lowered her head and touched her nose bridge in embarrassment when she saw this. It seemed that Tina's absence had calmed down Newt's excited brain, and it seemed that as a lonely person, he was stimulated by the news that Queenie and Jacob were going to get married. In short, Newt looked at Jacob, who was obviously too excited, even abnormally excited, and noticed that something was wrong with him. From Jacob's performance, Queenie probably cast a love spell on him. As Newt untied the spell on him, the contradiction between the two that was originally covered by the spell reappeared. In short, Queenie wanted to marry Jacob, but Jacob didn't want to do this. Once they got married, if the Magical Congress of the United States found out, they would put Queenie on trial. But if they didn't get married, there was still room for easing the matter. The Magical Congress would at most give him a forgetfulness spell like before. In this case, Jacob thought that whether to get married or not was just a formality, and there was no need to take such a big risk. But Queenie didn't think so. She felt that Jacob was backing off, especially after the two quarreled over this. Queenie's legitimacy was simply a catalyst for the deterioration of their relationship. It is normal for people to speak without thinking when they are excited, but Queenie can even see those heartless words that are suppressed by reason and not spoken. So Queenie angrily paraded away, leaving Jacob, who didn't know where to find people, in the rain. If Only Newt hadn't removed Jacob's love spell. An audience member couldn't help but say, and then the audience around him cast a shocked look. Are you serious? That's a love spell, not to mention that this thing is illegal, and not to mention the harm this method does to the other party, casting spells again and again to maintain the other party's false love for oneself. Everything is just a false illusion fabricated by oneself, and the wizard himself will collapse over time, right? After all, wizards who do this basically really love the other party, and they will take such an extreme path when they feel that there is no way out because of this. It has been a long time since we heard of wizards using this method to control the muggles they love. The last time we heard about it was Voldemort's mother. Many viewers couldn't help but shudder when they recalled this. On the other hand, Newt at home did not think that there was anything wrong with what he did. As he said, if Jacob really loved her, Queenie would not need to use any love spells at all. Just then, he found a torn postcard on the ground. After using the repaired postcard to piece it together, Newt was surprised to find that it was sent by Tina to Queenie to ask her to meet in Paris. Tina in Paris? Exclamation mark. For a moment, Newt's eyes widened when Jacob sobered up a little in the rain and went to find Newt. Newt was already packing his luggage to go to Paris to find Tina. Theseus? Question mark. British Ministry of Magic? Question mark. Professor Dumbledore? Question mark. A group of people went around for a long time, pie trading and appealing to reason, but in the end they failed to persuade Newt to give in at that time. After Professor Dumbledore played hard to get, everyone thought Newt was persuaded, but the fact was that Newt was still feeding his magical animals after returning home, and had no real intention of going to Paris as a result. Now a postcard from Tina made him pack his luggage and prepare to leave on the spot, and this postcard was not even sent to him. There is another detail here. On the inside of Newt's suitcase is a photo of Tina cut out from a newspaper, and the title above is the article about Tina's reinstatement after the Grindelwald incident in the United States. Report. In other words, Newt had already cut out the photo when he was still in the United States. Mrs. Tina couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. This was also something she didn't know. Is this true? What? From the perspective of watching from the sidelines, Newt also found that he had some double standards, so that he is a little shy now, but Mrs. Tina obviously will not stop there. That photo, did you really cut out a photo of me from the newspaper? Newt's eyes widened. He hadn't watched the movie seriously just now because he was too shy, but in the end, there were even such details. Seeing Newt nodding his head randomly, Mrs. Tina felt funny and sweet but also a little puzzled. Why don't you just ask me for a picture? Newspapers are basically virtuous, with a yellow background and black ink. When you cut out a picture, it looks like a wanted notice at first glance. Even if the people in the picture move, the picture on the wanted notice will also move, and as an official picture published in the newspaper, it is obvious that Tina cannot have any unnecessary movements, just a very professional smile. If Newt wanted a photo of her, given their situation at the time, Tina wouldn't refuse even if he just wanted to keep a photo as a souvenir. Isn't the quality much higher than the one in the newspaper? But seeing Newt's red state from his ears down his neck, Mrs. Tina couldn't help but sigh. That's right, if he could ask her for a photo, Newt wouldn't be Newt anymore. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412. Nagini. Tina mentioned in the postcard that she was looking for Credence in Paris, and Queenie said before leaving that she was going to look for Tina. So Newt and Jacob, who were also going to look for their wives, acted together again, and set off overnight. This action speed was so strong that Dumbledore was sad and Theseus cried. The camera turned, and everyone followed Tina's footsteps to a circus. Under the watch of countless audiences, various acrobatics such as fire breathing, fireworks, dancing, strange beasts, and manned bubbles appeared one after another. When they saw the tent of the circus, the audience couldn't help but be refreshed. It was mainly because they found the traces of Credence, which had nothing to do with a beautiful lady who looked pitiful. But then again, in a place like a circus, a beautiful and haggard lady. The hobby of saving fiction is actually common all over the world. However, as soon as Credence called the lady, many audiences who had just become a little excited couldn't help but be shocked again. Nagini, as I said before, those who would spend a lot of effort and money to watch the premiere are basically loyal fans or movie lovers. It is a basic operation to watch the boy who lived twice or three times, so when everyone heard this name, the big snake next to Voldemort came to mind. Is it a coincidence? It must be a coincidence, although it is said that there should be no coincidence in the name duplication in the works of art produced by the same producer, especially when one of the parties has a considerable role. This movie is based on reality. If the name of this lady in reality is really Nagini, then the producer will not change her name forcibly, right? However, reality is undoubtedly cruel. In the following circus performance, everyone had to see with their own eyes that the beautiful lady just now turned into the big snake that everyone just thought of. She is a blood curse orc! Exclamation mark. Although Europe and the United States claim to be open, the actual situation is well understood. Compared with the predecessors such as Sushian and Ninkachan, China still cannot keep up with the version. The beautiful illusion just now was ruthlessly shattered before it even got to the point. For a while, many viewers were furious, but it was not convenient to express it, so they could only turn it into anger. So who is the most suitable target for anger in the movie at present? Of course, it is the circus leader, exploiting the employees in the circus and bullying Credence. He is not a good person at first glance. For a while, words denouncing the circus leader rang out in various places in the screening room, and Credence is obviously not a person who will always endure humiliation. Maybe he used to be, but when the Obscurus appeared in his body, and even when he could control the Obscurus in his body, he could no longer become the Credence who did not fight back or scold. There was no resistance before, probably because Credence had his own purpose, and from his previous conversation with Nagini, the audience knew that they had planned to leave the circus. The circus leader, who was caught off guard by Nagini's sudden bite on the face, fell to the ground. Credence took the opportunity to release the imprisoned magical animals, and the whole circus fell into chaos. Tina didn't expect such an accident to happen after she finally found Credence, but after finding him, Tina couldn't find any trace of Credence at all. Now it has been more than half a year since the incident in New York. After so long, although Credence didn't know what he had experienced, it was obvious that he would not be ignorant of the wizarding world like before and could only use a silent state in desperation. Tina had to turn around and ask the circus leader if he knew anything about Credence. Perhaps he didn't want to cause trouble, or perhaps he wanted to leave as soon as possible. Seeing Tina, who is obviously not an ordinary audience, the circus director, who had packed up and was ready to leave, revealed a piece of information. Credence was asking about his mother. This piece of information was crucial. After all, since Credence had taken the initiative to leave, it meant that he had found out something. It was not difficult to guess that Credence would continue to explore along this line, but the problem was that Tina didn't have the ability to use this information. She lacked other information to cooperate with it in terms of Credence's life experience. She, or the Magical Congress of the United States behind her, probably didn't know as much as Credence. Fortunately, someone noticed her. After all, compared with other people who ran away directly when they encountered chaos, Tina took the initiative to chase after him and asked questions. It was almost an horror at first glance. This was probably the reason why the circus director gave the information very directly just now in the communication with Tina. The person said that Credence might be his distant relative, which echoed the information mentioned by Professor Dumbledore when he persuaded Newt before. You should know that according to records, the Obscurus generally does not live beyond the age of 10, but he lived to adulthood and was able to control the Obscurus in his body. Judging from the fact that he was able to escape the attack, this control is not simply to control himself to enter or exit the Obscurus state. He can even pretend that he is dead. Being able to control the Obscurus in the body to such a fine degree requires a very strong magical talent, so the wizarding world generally believes that Credence comes from an ancient wizard family because of a prophecy. Some people believe that he is the missing child of the Lestrange family. While Tina was investigating further along the road, Grindelwald was holding a meeting with his followers on the other side. Judging from his tone, he knew everything about Credence's background during the investigation, but he needed Credence's sincere surrender. So he didn't act rashly as he spoke. Grindelwald impressed his followers with his certainty that everything was under control, but one of them was still ignorant and asked Grindelwald why he didn't just capture the kid. Isn't it only a matter of time before he captures the guy first and then joins them? Grindelwald did not turn his back on such followers who did not have high enough ideological consciousness. However, as he approached, the sense of oppression was no worse than Voldemort's direct throwing of the Cruciatus curse. Grindelwald said that the most important enemy in their plan is Dumbledore, and Credence's role lies here: capture people and force them to join. If they are not willing to sincerely contribute to them, then you will kill Dumbledore. You recruited Credence to kill me, Professor. Dumbledore turned to look at Grindelwald. Grindelwald looked at the sky and the Coke, but did not look back. It's not that he felt guilty because he wanted to kill Dumbledore at that time, but because this sentence was actually false, so he felt even more guilty. Chapter 413. I hope everyone is okay. Grindelwald's true thoughts hidden under his words were clearly visible to those in the know when he said he wanted to kill Dumbledore. Grindelwald wore the blood covenant on his chest. If he really wanted to kill Dumbledore, the blood covenant would have reacted long ago. Not to mention Grindelwald, Newt and Jacob had contacted the smugglers overnight and set off for Paris at dawn. In the process, everyone also intuitively felt Newt's level of love talk. Her eyes are like salamanders. Oh. Got a witch couldn't help but cover her red cheeks and looked at the screen with emotion. This is too romantic. The wizard sitting next to her? Question mark. Where's this romantic? Is it really a compliment to say that a witch is like a salamander? However, the wizard, who had been solo for more than 20 years, thought about it and said that he, as a living example, had already shown that he was not good at chasing girls. Jacob on the screen seems to have the same view as himself, but his relationship is not going very smoothly. He had a big fight with Queenie before. On the other hand, the Scamanders have been a couple who have known each other for a lifetime, and this sentence has been certified by the witch in the next seat as a sentence that girls will find very romantic. In contrast, the wizard feels that he, as a negative example, should not question a successful model, but should learn humbly. Well, I learned it. After watching the movie, I will go to confess to my crush, and I must hurry up. When everyone has seen the movie, they will know this confession, which will not seem so romantic. This, Adam couldn't help but be stunned when he saw this. How to say it? This special confession is not useful for everyone, just like reading Shakespeare's sonnets to science students is sometimes not as effective as a normal confession, especially Newt's sentence, which has a strong personal style. Apart from Newt himself, basically few people can use it well. To put it bluntly, this sentence is romantic because it expresses the sincere love that belongs to Newt alone. Others simply copied it. If the movie is spread and the witch who is confessed to knows the meaning of this sentence, the success rate of this brother's confession may really increase. But if the other party is planning to confess as soon as possible, respect, blessing, and hope that the person is okay, silently praying for the warrior. For a second, Adam could not bear to look directly at it and turned his eyes to other audiences in the front row of the theater. Newt was embarrassed to shrink when he looked at himself on the screen, not just because of that somewhat unique confession in his behavior when he cast a spell to track down Tina's traces after rushing to the address on the postcard. It was the trace that appeared. And he called for help from the sniff, and he licked the ground to analyze the traces. Although his attention was diverted several times by magical animals during this period, Newt generally used various means to find the traces left by Tina, and all of the above was done in front of the pedestrians around him, and he was so oblivious to others. Mrs. Tina was shocked when she saw this, and she felt embarrassed for Newt. Fortunately, that street was similar to Diagon Alley, and both were pure wizard territory, otherwise Newt would have been caught and taken to the French Ministry of Magic. Facing Mrs. Tina's gaze, Newt blushed again. I just wanted to find you at the beginning. I didn't pay attention, whispering. His lips, Newt's voice was as thin as a mosquito's buzz, and even Mrs. Tina beside him couldn't hear it clearly, but this did not prevent Mrs. Tina from understanding what he meant. With various methods used by Newt, he successfully found Tina's trace, and knew that she had left with a wizard, and hurriedly chased after her. On the other side, Queenie also arrived in France. She also didn't find Tina, but she didn't have as many means as Newt to find Tina's trace, and she didn't sneak into France, so Queenie chose a legal and efficient way to go to the French Ministry of Magic to ask about Tina's whereabouts. However, the French Ministry of Magic has no record of Tina. At the same time, Grindelwald's followers infiltrated the French Ministry of Magic through transformation magic. Obviously, Newt and Jacob's journey to find their wife will not be smooth. Although I know this is true history, this is too much of a story. Can Newt really fight Grindelwald every time? An audience member couldn't help but complain when he saw this, but soon attracted another audience member's complaint. Where's the story? Madame Tina was an auror of the American Magic Congress. She was originally investigating matters related to Grindelwald. If Newt went to find her, wouldn't he fight Grindelwald? Yes, and even if it is true history, there are some choices in the movie. The movie only selected the part where Newt fought Grindelwald. Grindelwald was not released for 3 months after escaping from prison. Another audience member couldn't help but speak up. The audience, who had nothing to say, opened their mouths and finally looked at the screen. Ah, look! Credence seems to have found his mother. Such A poor change of subject, but it was because everyone was really interested in it that they shifted their attention from him to the movie. Credence and Nagini found the person he had found, the owner of the name that appeared on his adoption certificate. Looking at the cautious Credence, the audience couldn't help but soften their hearts, but the fact disappointed everyone. Credence didn't find his mother according to the other party. The other party was just a servant, but no matter what, at least the direction was not wrong, and the other party did know Credence's life experience at this time. The magical animal hunter hired by the British Ministry of Magic appeared. What? Don't know. It is obvious that the appearance of this person is even a bit blatant for the hint of the next plot. The audience couldn't help but whispered, this is the only person Credence found who is related to his life experience. However, the truth is so cruel. After a killing curse, the servant fell down before he finished telling the story that had happened. Nagini was trapped, and Credence also broke out the power of Obscurus during the battle. Grimson displayed great magical powers, and with a silent armor spell he managed to withstand Credence's angry attacks. However, Credence's attacks came one after another, and Grimson was ultimately defeated by the powerful force of Obscurus and retreated. Chapter 414. At that time, just like this moment, faced with the death of half of his family he had just found in front of him, Credence was extremely sad. Nagini couldn't help but hug him. Seeing this scene, some emotional viewers couldn't help but wipe away their tears. However, the camera turned, and Grimson, who had just escaped, met Grindelwald and told him what he had just done. Obviously, Grimson was actually Grindelwald's man, and what happened just now was also arranged by Grindelwald. This also explains how Grimson, a magical animal hunter, found this place at the same time as Credence. The magic ministries of various countries that were investigating Credence's life experience did not have such intelligence capabilities. Only Grindelwald, who claimed to know Credence's entire life experience, could allow Grimson to arrive at this time, and all this was to make Credence feel pain and frustration, to facilitate Grindelwald's subsequent plan, that is, to let him know that he could do nothing without him, so that he could follow him from the bottom of his heart. To put it more intuitively, it was to constantly suppress Credence and make him lose confidence, so that Grindelwald could pull him later. In fact, it can be seen from this that Grindelwald and Dumbledore are both veterans of Pooh and Big Promises, and they both failed in the end. Credence finally rebelled against Grindelwald, and although Newt was generally following Dumbledore's plan, the reason had little to do with Dumbledore and could be said to be completely unrelated from this perspective. The International Confederation of Wizards owes Madame Tina a banner. What is the greatest witch of the 20th century? Tactical Retreat JPG. Seeing Grindelwald saying for the greater good to Grimson, the audience almost sprayed him in the face. Grindelwald, UTNND are not a human. Professor Grindelwald in the corner couldn't help rubbing his face. Curse, he is used to it now. After the serious and depressing atmosphere, the camera turned, and it was still a lighter plot as usual. Newt and Jacob, who are still on the road to find their wives, sat on the streets of Paris and watched the intimate couples dating everywhere. The resentment on their bodies almost materialized. Seeing this, the audience, who had red eyes just now, couldn't help but laugh out loud, and some of the audience even had a sniffle. Anyway, the two successfully found the wizard who took Tina away at that time, and the other party agreed to take them to see Tina. Bang! As a result, Tina did see her, but the problem is that they are now locked up. Looking at the falling iron door, Newt was numb, and the other party smiled slightly. Just say whether you have seen Tina now. However, before the other party could be proud for long, the other party covered his eyes and fell down, and Newt, the magical animal Botricle, was introduced in the previous movie. It is very good at unlocking, and Newt always carries such a magical animal with him. It can be said that everything went smoothly. The only thing that was not smooth was probably the name Tina called him after meeting Newt. Mr. Scamander. When this name came out of Tina's mouth, Newt was stunned on the spot. The situation was urgent at that time. Can I ask you how you felt at that time, Mrs. Tina glanced at the screen. It was the process of them conquering Zawu at that time, not the past. She didn't know, so she turned her head to look at Newt. Although Professor Scamander wanted to review the process of conquering Zawu, it was obvious that Tina was more important. It's actually hard to describe the details, but I was very nervous at that time. Nervous? Well, Newt tilted his head slightly, looked down at Mrs. Tina's hand, quickly raised his eyes to see Mrs. Tina's expression, and then lowered his eyes, second only to when you called me Newt Artemis Fedor Scamander, Mrs. Tina widened her eyes. How could I call you like that, even if you call the other person's full name in anger during a quarrel? You wouldn't call it so full, right? No, you didn't once. Newt nodded to confirm that he was definitely not mistaken. Mrs. Tina frowned, stopped watching the movie, crossed her fingers on her thighs, crossed her legs and looked at Newt. When? That day? Which day? On the day we got married, at night. The fire that was about to reach Mrs. Tina's head was extinguished in an instant, and the wisps of green smoke made Mrs. Tina's face flushed, and she even felt a little dizzy. She opened her mouth several times but couldn't speak, for fear that she would speak incoherently. You, just... When Mrs. Tina was about to sort out her thoughts, Nit suddenly said, "Let's watch a movie, okay?" At the same time, a strong, oh no, it was familiar music that sounded, and the audience's memory was suddenly pulled back to the second half of last year as expected. The familiar castle appeared on the screen. Hogwarts, however, happy times are always short-lived. Before everyone could sigh that they had never expected to see Hogwarts on the screen again, they saw people from the Ministry of Magic swaggering into Hogwarts Castle. Well, how should I put it? This moment is just like that moment. Oh no, this movie is set earlier than The Boy Who Lived. It should be at that time, right at this moment, not to mention seeing the young version of Professor McGonagall following the Ministry of Magic angrily and trying to stop them from breaking in. Everyone really felt like they were dreaming back to the second half of last year facing the visitors from the Ministry of Magic. The young, or middle-aged version of Professor Dumbledore was obviously tougher than in The Boy Who Lived, but when the other party asked him to deal with Grindelwald, Professor Dumbledore looked away. "I can't do it." The visitors from the Ministry of Magic were obviously prepared for this. They had already found out that Dumbledore and Grindelwald were as close as brothers. "We are closer than brothers." Hearing this, Professor Grindelwald sat up straight at once, and looked at Professor Dumbledore next to him with a look of joy that made Professor Dumbledore unable to bear to look. However, there were obviously only a few people who could be pleased by this sentence. Travers, the then director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the person who led the team into Hogwarts, believed that Professor Dumbledore's words were proof that he was on Grindelwald's side, so he decisively cast a spell on Professor Dumbledore, which turned into an iron ring on Professor Dumbledore's hand. The iron ring allowed him to sense all the spells cast by Professor Dumbledore. In addition, the Ministry of Magic also strengthened its surveillance of Professor Dumbledore. Professor Grindelwald's eyes instantly turned cold. Chapter 415. I saw myself holding a pair of thick wool socks. "He has been dead for many years, Professor," Dumbledore said helplessly. "As for his descendants, his son became a Death Eater and has now been executed, although the group of Death Eaters back then were subjectively imprisoned for an unknown number of years. For others they were basically killed the next day. Only Bellatrix, who refused to repent during the detention process and died unconsciously in endless detention, can be taken back while her family is still alive. In this case, there is no longer any question whether the death penalty will be executed or not." It makes sense. Hearing what Professor Dumbledore said, Professor Grindelwald let out a complicated sigh. On the one hand, it was regretful to know that he could not take action personally to vent his anger. On the other hand, Professor Grindelwald knew that even if he wanted to take action against Travers, he would have to pay a price. Maybe the Ministry of Magic can't find traces, but that boy Adam can definitely find traces. After all, that guy can even pull his past self. The movie did not stop with the exchange between the two old men. Through Rita's memories, everyone saw her and Newt's student days. Mrs. Tina looked at this section very seriously, but even with her understanding of Newt, she never imagined that Newt Spoggart would actually be sitting in an office working. Is Newt's distaste for boring office work so intense? Watching Newt turn the Boggart into a dragon made from modified desks, Mrs. Tina felt dumbfounded, and the audience burst into laughter. Newt is probably the only one in the world with such a unique Boggart, and if Newt's Boggart brought everyone joy, then Rita's Boggart made people confused. Everyone only saw a piece of white cloth floating in the sky. What was that? Little wontons, accompanied by an uncertain question. The audience who had tasted this delicacy at the Storm restaurant couldn't help but twitch their eyes. Don't tell me, it looks quite similar, but this is obviously a joke. Where did the little wontons come from in the British wizarding world at that time, and how could anyone be afraid of the little wontons? It's a pity that the movie did not reveal what the mysterious Boggart was, and the subsequent conversation between Newt and Lita under the tree quickly diverted the audience's attention. Is this the tree that belonged to Snape and Lily in The Boy Who Lived? One audience member couldn't help but have a slightly subtle expression. No, it shouldn't be, right? They hadn't entered Hogwarts yet at that time, And this tree should be inside Hogwarts. The audience who said this was a little nervous. Although they knew that the two trees were not the same tree, the sense of deja vu was too strong. What does this want to express? Will the childhood sweethearts playing under the tree not be able to be together in the end? After these movies are released, it is foreseeable that young couples in the future will probably avoid this environment under the tree. For no other reason than this environment is a bit unlucky. On the other end, Queenie was comforted by a kind person after leaving the French Ministry of Magic. Queenie followed the person back as a guest, who knew that the person was actually a follower of Grindelwald, and she also met Grindelwald directly just when the audience couldn't help but feel worried about Queenie. Grindelwald did not take action against Queenie, but opened his mouth to recruit Queenie, and let her go after Queenie silently refused. Seeing Queenie, who was nodding but shaken on her face, the audience's heart suddenly died. Although Queenie rejected Grindelwald, Grindelwald's solicitation just hit the point. Queenie was heartbroken and collapsed because of her love for Jacob. What Grindelwald said about wizards and muggles in a world of free love, it may not have been alluring to the British wizard, but it was alluring to Queenie. And now this trick of playing hard to get feels even more familiar, as if I just saw Professor Dumbledore use this trick on Newt just now. Audiences who have experienced Grindelwald's ability to confuse people in previous plots cannot help but have little hope that Queenie will be persuaded by Grindelwald in the future. Is that the Mirror of Eris? Looking at the screen, several viewers who didn't care so much about Queenie couldn't help but say, hearing this, the audience who were lamenting about Queenie's visible future of depravity suddenly became energetic. When they looked up, they saw on the screen that it was indeed the Mirror of Eris that appeared in The Boy Who Lived, and standing in front of the magic mirror was Professor Dumbledore. Oh, is it going to finally reveal what Dumbledore saw in the Mirror of Eris? An audience member smacked his thigh excitedly. When the Mirror of Eris, a treasure, first appeared in the movie, it caused a lot of discussion. What will you see in the Mirror of Eris? What will XXX see in the Mirror of Eris? In-depth discussion of what Harry and Ron saw in the Mirror of Eris, etc. Wait, compared with these topics, the discussion triggered by Professor Dumbledore's description of what he saw in the Mirror of Eris is one of the most popular. Well, after all, Harry was not the one who saved the wizarding world in reality, and I saw myself holding a pair of thick wool socks or something like that. Professor Dumbledore's words meant to coax a child. It's a little too obvious. Let me see what the pair of wool socks you saw in the Mirror of Eris are. A wizard who often contributes to the Quibbler had his eyes lit up and stared at the Mirror of Eris on the screen in a corner of the screening room. An excited old man almost stood up to see it, but fortunately the old man next to him pulled hard enough under the gaze of the crowd, who were either expectant, excited, or scrutinizing. The Mirror of Eris in front of Professor Dumbledore slowly changed. Two young wizards stood opposite each other and stretched out their palms toward each other. Ha! A short shout suddenly sounded in the screening room. The audience finally chose the former between continuing to watch the wonderful secret in front of them and turning around to scold the guy with no public morality. Huh? A young witch suddenly made a puzzled voice. Strange, why is Professor Dumbledore's Mirror of Eris Professor Campbell, and she just graduated last year, and she was very impressed by the young professors who openly fell in love on campus. Oh, those are Professor Dumbledore and Grindelwald in their youth in the movie. The images of the two professors were used in The Boy Who Lived. Maybe it's because they couldn't find the images of Professor Dumbledore and Grindelwald in their youth. Her companion explained it to her. The witch nodded in understanding. In this way, it's really suitable after all. They're all young same-sex couples, and it wouldn't be too awkward to be used as the image of another same-sex couple if the image of other wizards is used. The wizard whose image is used may not be able to accept being put together with another same-sex wizard, even if their images are used as the young state of two legendary wizards. Chapter 416. This is the mouth I want to see. Okay, is this the wool sock that Professor Dumbledore saw? Harry wanted to say this, but reason still made him only complain in his heart. These wool socks are made in Germany, right? And we agreed not to be obsessed with the Mirror of Eris. Silly boy. Professor Dumbledore can do such a thing as keeping the Philosopher's Stone in the magic mirror. You can imagine how much he knows about this mirror. Adam, in the projection room, shook his head. Inside the Mirror of Eris is now placed in the Forbidden Forest. Wizards who enter the depths of the 4th area or the 5th area alone have a chance to encounter it, which can be regarded as a kind of incentive mechanism. Not to mention, it is very effective for those young wizards who are talented but not so obsessed with becoming stronger. In the corner of the projection room, Professor Dumbledore, who was seen by everyone in the Mirror of Eris, let go of Grindelwald's hand after Grindelwald finally calmed down, and then covered his face with his hands and sighed helplessly. I didn't expect that he would be seen to this extent at the age of more than 100. I can't keep my dignity in my later years. No, Professor Dumbledore, after the book you and Professor Grindelwald published, your reputation has been reduced to nothing. Adam corrected silently, but unfortunately Professor Dumbledore could not hear him. In contrast to Professor Dumbledore's helplessness, the smile on Professor Grindelwald's face was extremely arrogant. That's right, what he really wanted to see was this mouth. Why did he want to watch this movie even though he knew that there would be a lot of his own black history? Why did he want to watch these movies even though he knew that the protagonists of these movies were Newt and the others? Doesn't he know what he did back then? Or is he interested in how Newt destroyed his plan? Of course, he wanted to see what Dumbledore thought and did back then. Sure enough, Dumbledore. Are you still stubborn? I can see at a glance that you still have feelings for me. When everyone was paying attention to Professor Dumbledore's secrets, not all viewers were only staring at the two people in the mirror, but also noticed their movements. What is that? The audience could only see that the two took out their own blood, and then the 2 drops of blood gathered together to form a silver pendant, but their magical knowledge did not support them to recognize the true identity of the pendant. However, some viewers still recognized that it was the thing that Grindelwald had been carrying with him. When Grindelwald first escaped from prison, his followers were very concerned about it, and they would grab it even if they used their mouths to grab it. So, what is that, Dumbledore? And Grindelwald's token of love? The person who said this was looked down upon by the audience next to him. Who can't see this? The problem is that Dumbledore and Grindelwald are 2 of the most powerful wizards in the world. Even if they were geniuses with powerful magic in their youth, could their token of love be a simple thing? The camera turned, and when Professor Dumbledore was obsessed with the Mirror of Eris, Newt was trying to help the Zawu who had just been put into the box to unlock the chains on his body. It's just that he was so involved in this process that he forgot about Tina and Jacob in the process afterwards. Newt couldn't help but raise his hands to cover his face, making the same gesture as Professor Dumbledore behind him. Mrs. Tina laughed non-stop at Newt, who was not understanding the romance on the screen and was trying to repair his relationship with her under Jacob's various assists, especially the description of the runes. Using the head in the middle of the runes to describe the other party was very far-sighted. The audience couldn't help but think of the compliment Newt prepared for Tina during the rehearsal just now. And for a moment they all synchronized their brain waves with Tina's at the time. Who else would say this except you? Wow, so romantic. The wizard, who was still complaining in his heart, just now heard the witch next to him say this, and looked around. Everyone's face had a sweet smile as if they saw a young couple, and saw Tina on the screen, who was obviously in a good mood because of this sentence. After 2 seconds of silence, the wizard dispelled the wrong idea in his heart and secretly wrote down this sentence: wait until the confession is successful. At this moment, the situation on the screen suddenly changed. A black curtain flew out from nowhere, passing through the streets, covering the buildings, and gradually drifting towards the sky. When Tina saw this scene, the sweetness on her face just now disappeared. That's Grindelwald calling his followers. The camera zoomed out, and all the surrounding areas were gradually covered by this black curtain, covering the sky and the earth, almost covering the whole of Paris. Hiss, so handsome. A low cry suddenly sounded in the screening room, causing some dissatisfaction among other viewers. How could you say that about a villain like Grindelwald? But I have to say, it is indeed a little handsome. 4. The European Ministry of Magic at that time. Is this the same as the reappearance of the Dark Lord's corpse? This question caused Professor Grindelwald behind to sneer. Voldemort, the ugly logo is even uglier. A double control socket that studies black magic and has gone crazy and transformed himself into a ghost. How can it be compared with me? Even if I was defeated, I was still a revolutionary with unfulfilled ambitions. Right, too. Everyone, both of you are terrorists. Professor Dumbledore demolished him mercilessly. Congratulations, your current headmaster of Hogwarts is also a terrorist. In the past, Professor Grindelwald might have poked Dumbledore's lung tube in return, but since he was in a good mood now, Professor Dumbledore's words did not affect him at all. On the screen, seeing Grindelwald making such a big fuss, Tina couldn't help but wonder whether Grindelwald had already succeeded before them, but Newt said that he was not afraid of Grindelwald accelerating in a straight line. He knew that on a short road, fast corners are really fast, although taking this detour might violate a lot of laws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but he came here to find Tina illegally, and Credence's life and safety could not be considered so much on the other side. Grindelwald has indeed been in contact with Credence. Although Credence is an adult, he has been under the oppressive environment of his adoptive mother in the past. He was freed for less than a year. He was naturally unable to stop Grindelwald's superb poem method. What's more, Grindelwald still has the truth about his life experience that he has been pursuing. This time, Grindelwald once again performed a trick of playing hard to get, first stating that he had no ill intentions towards Credence, and in addition, he also provided Credence with clues that had been cut off because of Grimson constantly suppress the other party's self-confidence and make the other party dependent on you. Grindelwald is an old pooh. Chapter 417 Newt Brotherly Brother God's Commander. The perspective returns to the protagonists, or more precisely, to Jacob. Jacob, who was just mumbling about being hungry, had to continue to starve while watching the wizard who was trying to catch the protagonists because of his good brother Newt's decisive pursuit of Tina. At this moment, a ghost-like figure appeared beside Jacob. The pale face seemed to be indistinguishable from the pure white clothes. If it weren't for the translucent texture, it would almost be mistaken for a ghost. Just when everyone was wondering where this old man came from, the old man's words echoed in the audience's ears like thunder. I am an immortal alchemist, immortality, alchemist. And at this time everyone also remembered where this place was. It was the address that Professor Dumbledore gave Newt before. He said that there was an old friend of his here, recalling an important but unseen character in the first part of The Boy Who Lived. Is that Nicole Flamel? The audience's eyes widened. Nicole Flamel's name is already a legend in the wizarding world, but few people know what he looks like. After all, it's been too long since he was active, and finding records directly related to him may even require archaeology. But to be honest, the Nicole Flamel in front of us is really different from the Nicole Flamel that everyone generally imagines. He would get hurt just by shaking hands with people, and his jogging speed is not even as fast as a normal person's walking speed, except for the amount of hair on his head. Nicole Flamel is really as weak as a long-lived muggle old man. Several middle-aged wizard audiences touch their shiny heads with some envy. Even so, a body that would get hurt just by shaking hands is too fragile. Does the immortality obtained by relying on the Philosopher's Stone have such a disadvantage? You should know that the wizard's body is protected by magic, and the impact of aging on the strong should not be so great. When Professor Dumbledore was over 100 years old, he could still swim through the seawater to reach the cave where Voldemort hid the Horcrux. In fact, there is no way to do this. Although wizards have magic to protect their bodies, and Nicholas Flamel's magic is definitely not less than Professor Dumbledore's, his body is now 400 or 500 years old. If there is no magic protection, he should not be able to move, and to be honest, this is really not a disadvantage. At most, it is not so perfect. You laugh at Nicholas Flamel's osteoporosis, and Nicholas Flamel laughs at how your grandson doesn't look like your grandfather at all. In any case, this plot has revealed a corner of the mystery of the legendary alchemist Nicholas Flamel. However, in addition to being an alchemist, few people know that Nicholas Flamel actually has the ability to predict. He used the crystal ball to predict Queenie's whereabouts, but Jacob was too excited. Not only did he cause Nicholas Flamel the most serious injury he had suffered in hundreds of years with a handshake, but he also left before he finished reading the prophecy. When Nicholas Flamel raised his hand to call him, he had already gone out like a gust of wind, leaving Nicholas Flamel looking at the crystal ball with a worried look on his face. The prophecy continued. Newt and Tina also appeared, followed by Grindelwald and the blue flames filing the crystal ball. Wow, that's fire escape protection. Ron's eyes widened. The fire looked so familiar. So, Nicholas Flamel also predicted his own death at that time. Harry looked at Nicholas Flamel's crystal ball and suddenly said the topic changed too quickly, and Ron's mind didn't turn around at once. It took a few seconds for Ron to react to what Harry had just said. When they destroyed Voldemort's plan in their first year, the Philosopher's Stone was destroyed in the fire in the last Chamber of Secrets, which also caused Nicholas Flamel and his wife to be unable to continue to live forever. Harry didn't know that Nicholas Flamel and his wife had lived to the point of not wanting to live anymore, nor did he know whether Nicholas Flamel had really arranged this with Professor Dumbledore. All he knew was the explanation given to him by Professor Dumbledore at the time, and he could only take those words as true. But in any case, because he caused the death of the couple who had lived for more than 600 years and could have continued to live, Harry couldn't have no pressure at all. On the contrary, this heavy thought has been weighing on his heart after seeing the prophecy. Nicholas Flamel once again trotted all the way to a cabinet and took out a heavy book from the bottom of the cabinet. The red gem above the book immediately attracted the audience's attention. The Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone, the fifth element. Alchemy is recognized as the highest achievement, which can make people immortal and turn stones into gold. It can be said that all the pursuits of alchemy at the beginning of its creation can be realized by it. However, the next moment everyone sighed. As we all know, the Philosopher's Stone was destroyed in June 1992, and its maker Nicholas Flamel has also passed away. Although they can't touch the Philosopher's Stone, even if it is not destroyed, it is undoubtedly a huge loss to the entire wizarding world. Sniff. Adam rubbed his nose and frowned. Strange, why does my nose itch when I am anchored in the material dimension? At this moment, Nicholas Flamel has completed the communication with the portrait in the book. He has not taken action for hundreds of years, but he can't sit idly by and watch Jacob, Newt and others fall into danger on the other side. Newt has used the Polyjuice potion to transform into Theseus and is ready to overtake. Why does it seem that every ministry of magic in every country has been invaded? An audience member couldn't help but ask the British Ministry of Magic, the American Magical Congress, and now the French Ministry of Magic. This is probably why the Ministry of Magic now has to be tested before entering. Another audience member seemed to be an insider of the Ministry of Magic, because just going to the Ministry of Magic to handle the procedures does not require a detectable test. Puff. A suppressed laugh suddenly sounded in the screening room, and then the same suppressed laughter sounded from all directions. The reason is simple. It is not the first time that the use of Polyjuice potion to sneak into the Ministry of Magic has appeared in the movie, but before, it was mostly because of various accidents that the Polyjuice potion was delayed until the Polyjuice potion expired. But this time, the scene where Newt, who turned into Theseus, looked up and looked at the real Theseus was indeed a bit unbearable. Then, when Newt saw his brother being knocked back with his hands tied on the chair, he said something that made the audience burst out laughing. What kind of brotherly relationship do these two have? Chapter 418. There are so many people. God, if only my brother was like Professor Scamander's brother. In fact, what Ron wants to say is, does this kind of brotherhood really exist? From the beginning of the movie to now, Theseus is a complete control of his younger brother. He has arranged everything for his younger brother Newt, but it is just not in line with Newt's own wishes. The situation is similar now. Theseus obviously has no intention of arresting his younger brother and bringing him to justice. Anyone with a discerning eye knows that even if Newt is caught by Theseus, Theseus will eventually find a way to bail him out. What a touching brotherhood this is. Ron looked at the screen as if he were watching some fantasy story at the same time. Percy, Fred and George flashed through his mind. Bill and Charlie, because of the large age gap, didn't get along with Ron as peers, but this did not prevent the term brotherhood from Ron's side, and it was completely inconsistent with the scene he saw. Harry watched the movie and listened to Ron's words that seemed to be questioning fate. His expression was also a little complicated. Brotherly relationship. Well, Dudley's face flashed through his mind. And Harry suddenly got excited and shook his head twice to get the big round face out of his mind. At this moment, Newt and Tina have successfully sneaked into the French Ministry of Magic. Although Newt stood directly in the face of a wanted criminal, they still successfully entered the third underground floor they wanted to enter. Here are the things they wanted to do. The information you are looking for. However, because of the identity of Tina's fiancé that she mentioned when she helped Newt sneak in, the two started to have some misunderstandings. Well, how should I put it? A well-matched defense. Although Newt's explanation of "I want you to be happy but I don't want you to be happy about what you just said you were happy about because I'm not happy about it" seems like a tongue twister, but Tina's understanding that you are not happy about the fact that your brother and Lita are getting married, so now you want to save Lita, is not a slap in the thigh. To a certain extent, Newt and Tina are indeed a match made in heaven. As long as one of the two has a little bit of talent in emotional communication, they will not be able to explain a simple misunderstanding into a logical thinking question like this. Professor Scamander's son and daughter-in-law were stunned by this. When they turned around, Mrs. Tina looked up at the sky, and Professor Scamander looked down at his toes. At this moment, some kind of premonition from the underworld told Scamander that it was best not to talk to her parents at this time, otherwise something terrible might happen. At this time, the fight between the two in the movie had reached the end. Looking into Tina's eyes, Nit couldn't help but say the first half of the compliment. Because of Jacob's previous instructions, Nit didn't say the last half of the sentence, but he couldn't help but describe it. The description he used was the same one he used in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So Tina, who had read his book, knew what the second half of the sentence he didn't say was her eyes were like salamanders, like fire in a deep pool. Not to mention, this sentence is still very touching without mentioning the salamander. Adam thought as he ate his cornflakes. Speaking of which, in the future, these quotations from Professor Scamander will become wizard slang in the new era. Right, you are literally the one in the middle, used to praise the other person for their vision. Your eyes are like salamanders, used to express love, similar to the moonlight is beautiful tonight, not to mention, with the influence of Enud himself and the phenomenal influence of fantastic beasts and where to find them. This situation is not impossible for a moment. The two people whose brain waves matched each other stared at each other affectionately, and even the background music became ambiguous. However, at this moment, Lita Lestrange entered the place. At her call, someone who knew how to look up information, the corresponding information cabinet took the initiative to move in front of her. Why couldn't Tina and Professor Scamander do this before? Ron was stunned when he saw the two people in the movie being blocked by the moving file cabinets. Do you even need to ask? They don't know they can do this, and Professor Scamander's identity as a wanted criminal has long been revealed. Harry couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this. Wasn't the close-up of the old lady's eyes obvious enough just now? Really? Where did you find out? Harry was silent for a moment. Let's watch the movie first. At this time, Rita had discovered Newt's existence through the boat trickle, but the old lady at the gate had also been waiting for the guards, which were a group of civet cats looking at the civet. Harry and Ron showed unbearable expressions at first, seeing that Lita had just subconsciously released the spell, and Newt's belated explanation that they won't attack as long as they are not provoked came belatedly. Harry and Ron smacked their thighs in excitement. Right. That's right. This is what it was like in the beginning. The two of them provoked more than a dozen civets with flying attacks and fainting spells. Hermione didn't have time to explain, and then they were chased up trees and into the water. The good news is that it didn't take long for them to get rid of the civet. The bad news is that the civet didn't catch up because the civet didn't dare to go where they entered. What a sad story. After a chase, Nit released the Zawu, successfully suppressed the civet cat that could continuously replicate itself, and used the Zawu's ability to travel thousands of miles a day to escape the Ministry of Magic. Before, Nit had asked Tina and learned that there was anti-apparition magic in the French Ministry of Magic, but the spatial transferability of magical animals would not be restricted by this phoenix, Zawu, and even house elves can perform spatial transfer in places where there is anti-apparition. It can only be said that wizards are still too arrogant about magical animals and never consider this. Unlike the current British Ministry of Magic, Bernard has already sentenced many wizards who found this loophole after watching the movies in the Dream Cinema and tried to commit theft and other illegal crimes with the help of house elves. It can only be said that these stupid wizards really have no ability to draw inferences from one example, and they will not think divergently when they see anything, even if they don't know that Adam is the mastermind behind the British Ministry of Magic, or the sponsor in their eyes. Don't people in the Ministry of Magic know how to watch movies, without mentioning others, just in the two series of The Boy Who Lived and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them? 2 Ministry of Magic staff members were present at every premiere. HU X2. After a short break, Newt and his team immediately rushed to Père Lachaise Cemetery, where the information they were looking for was transferred. However, as the camera turned to Père Lachaise Cemetery, this cemetery, which should have been very deserted in the middle of the night, made the audience couldn't help but sigh from the bottom of their hearts. So many people. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419. There are so many people, watching the complicated family relationship unfolding on the screen. The audience couldn't help but reveal some confusion while showing curiosity. So, what is the relationship between these three people? Out of coveting other ancient magical bloodlines, Yusuf's mother was forcibly taken away by the old Lestrange with the imperious curse to marry and gave birth to a daughter, Lita Lestrange. What a humiliation it was to have his wife forcibly taken away. Yusuf made an unbreakable vow because of his father's will, and he must kill the old Lestrange's beloved. He thought that this beloved would be Lita, his half-sister, but the Lestranges are a family that values boys over girls. Even the family tree does not record the women of the family, but replaces them with a beautiful flower without a name. The old Lestrange did not have any love for Lita at all. The unbreakable vow cannot be fooled. After knowing this, Yusuf would not kill his sister. Knowing the truth, old Lestrange was obviously not satisfied with Lita as his offspring. He soon found another witch with ancient magic blood to marry, And this time he gave birth to a son called Lestrange. Obviously, this was the child that old Lestrange wanted, a male heir with ancient magic blood. He also met the person that Yusuf had to kill in the unbreakable oath. According to Yusuf, old Lestrange secretly sent him from France to the United States when he was a child because he knew that he wanted to kill Kos, but because of an accident, the ship that Kos was riding on had an accident. However, looking at Credence now, it is obvious that Kos survived by some unknown coincidence and their current situation is in line with the prophecy. The exiled son, Credence, the desperate daughter, Lita. The warrior returned with revenge, Yusuf, and flew out of the waves. The family emblem of the Lestrange family is the raven. This relationship is really complicated. Some viewers with poor logic have even begun to empty their brains and give up thinking, but there are also wizards with better logic who barely sorted out the complicated relationship between the three people, and the excitement of eating melons on their faces is obviously more intense. But this is not the end at this time. Rita couldn't help but stand up and tell a shocking truth. Kosso had died that year, and she was the one who killed him. The accident at the beginning was that the ship they were on had a shipwreck. At that time, the servant who disguised himself as their grandmother, the maid that Credence found before, hurriedly picked up Kosso and boarded the rescue ship with her. But the Kosso was not the real Kosso. Before the shipwreck, Rita was disturbed by Kosso and couldn't sleep. There happened to be a baby in the room next to her, and it was very quiet, so Rita exchanged the two babies. She just wanted to sleep peacefully at the time, thinking that she would switch back after waking up, but who knew that the ship would suddenly sink. Therefore, the Kos who was taken to the lifeboat, that is, Credence, who is now following the clues of Kos' identity, is actually the baby in the next room. At that time, seeing this, the audience couldn't help but widen their eyes, especially seeing the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes slowly falling into the deep sea. In the memory, it was the appearance of Rita's Bogart before. For a moment, the audience had goosebumps all over their bodies. After a crisp and loud sound, the wizard who said that Rita's Bogart looked like a small wonton said with a broken face, "I'm really damned, but who would have thought that a piece of white cloth floating in the air, its true identity is actually a baby who is slowly sinking to the bottom of the sea and is being drowned bit by bit? Then, do you know the identity of the baby you replaced?" Just when everyone was still immersed in the shock of this old shocking melon, Tina's question made everyone's thoughts return to the story happening in the movie. Yes, if that's the case, then the clues to Credence's life experience are broken again. After searching all the way and going through untold hardships, he finally found the clues to where he came from, but he was told that it was actually someone else's. Looking at Credence, who just said that he wanted to know his life experience before he died even if he was killed, the audience's pity and sympathy increased. Unfortunately, Rita didn't know Credence's life experience either. After all, she was just a little girl at that time, so how could she ask who lived around her? For a moment, the atmosphere fell into stagnation again. Credence's face was full of confusion about what to do next and numbness that the goal he had pursued with so much hardship suddenly turned into a bubble. It was already difficult to check things that happened so many years ago. Credence was lucky to find the servant based on the adoption procedures of that year. As a result, now he has to check who is the passenger in the room next to Rita on the ship. This outrageous relationship. How to check? Where to check? Not to mention whether the original passenger list can be preserved to this day. Even if it can be preserved, it is still unknown whether the records of that era would be detailed enough to record which room each passenger stayed in. The world is so big, but he couldn't find his home. The expression on Credence's face made the audience feel even more distressed for him, and they even secretly hoped that Grindelwald knew Credence's life experience, not causes. At this moment, the stone door beside them suddenly opened, revealing the road leading to the center of the cemetery. With doubts, everyone in the room couldn't help but go through the stone door to explore the scene, and the camera made the audience gasp. The circular open air square in the center of the cemetery was full of people, and they were all pure-blooded wizards. From the description of the movie and the plot seen before, it is not difficult to guess that these are followers summoned by Grindelwald's black curtain that covered Paris before so many people. You know, in the cemetery, the people summoned by Voldemort after his resurrection can be counted with just 2 hands, and Voldemort's Death Eaters at the peak were less than 100. But considering that Grindelwald's sphere of influence covers the entire Europe and America, this gap seems understandable. What the hell? Think about how Voldemort led his Death Eaters to fight in and out of the Ministry of Magic as if they were in an empty place, and then look at the huge crowd of wizards on the screen now. The audience simply cannot understand how those Ministry of Magic defeated Grindelwald. It can't all be Professor Dumbledore's output, right? Chapter 420. Don't develop an inexplicable competitive spirit in a place like this. forehead. In the screening room, Adam couldn't help but look at Professor Dumbledore. Not to mention, to a certain extent this is true originally, even if Professor Dumbledore could defeat Professor Grindelwald, the Wiccan party would not have collapsed just like that. Wasn't it because Grindelwald was caught? It's not like he had never been caught before. Let's go shoulder to shoulder. No matter how awesome Dumbledore is, he can't defeat them all by himself, right? But unfortunately, the leader of the Wiccan party is a Dumbledore fan. All day long, he only gives everyone CPU and promotes their great plan, telling everyone how awesome Dumbledore is, and their great plan has nothing but Dumbledore. People can stop over time. The impression that Dumbledore was awesome, very awesome, and super awesome, together with their great plan, was deeply imprinted in the hearts of every Wiccan party. When the news came out that Grindelwald was defeated by Dumbledore one day, the members of the Wiccan party felt that Dumbledore was really awesome and that even the great Grindelwald was no match for him. So we should all go home. It's not that the Wiccan party is so devoid of pursuit and loyalty that they fell into disarray like the Death Eaters, but the accurate predictions and powerful CPU technology have fixed their thinking under the influence of Grindelwald. Thinking their plan would either succeed or be sabotaged by Dumbledore. Now that Grindelwald is defeated by Dumbledore, it is obvious that he is on the road to failure of his plan. The future Grindelwald mentioned has never been missed. This trust in Grindelwald made them convinced that no matter how hard they tried, it would not help, and they simply gave up. However, their loyalty to Grindelwald is still the same. As long as the leader Grindelwald lets out the wind, no matter how tightly the Ministry of Magic of various countries defends him, the Wiccan party will find a way to help Grindelwald escape from prison. However, Grindelwald himself voted this time. The members of the Wiccan party waited for decades one by one, and finally got the news about Grindelwald, only to find that it was Grindelwald who asked them to follow another A New Hope in the wizarding world who inherits Grindelwald's ideals. Adam, huh? This also led to Adam having to go through a lot of talking with the excited old men and women when he first took over the Wookiee party. Of course, the final result was not bad. Not knowing the truth of that year, the audience was shocked by the number of Grindelwald's followers, but they still couldn't help but smile knowingly when they saw the reunion of Jacob and Queenie. Newt and Tina had long since reunited, and after going full circle, the pair finally saw each other again. It's not good, Harry sighed. Ron turned to look at Harry and slowly typed a question mark. Isn't it wonderful that a couple reunited in this scene, and the two of them obviously didn't look like they were going to quarrel? What's wrong, brother? You must have been stimulated by something, and suddenly you want to have lovers in the world, right? While thinking, Ron looked at Harry with eyes that gradually became unkind. What happened between your boy and my sister? Because Ron's look was so straightforward, Harry understood what he was thinking without even thinking. He couldn't help but roll his eyes and explained at the same time, Jacob came here after seeing Nico Flamel's prophecy, but why did Queenie appear here? Ron was not really stupid, but his thinking was not that out of the box. Harry immediately thought of this. Are you saying that Queenie is also a follower of Grindelwald now? Because he was too shocked, Ron did not hold back his voice. Although it did not spread throughout the screening hall, several rows around him were still clearly disturbed. This kind of violation of public order and good morals obviously attracted the disapproving looks of the surrounding audience. Since it was difficult to see faces in the dark screening room against the light, Harry quickly blended in and looked at Ron accusingly. Ron? Question mark. The movie was still going on, and the audience had no time to stare at Ron. After giving him a look, they looked back at the screen. Harry coughed lightly in the face of Ron's questioning gaze and continued the previous topic. Well, I'm not completely sure, but, thinking of the previous exchange between Professor Grindelwald and Queenie, at least her heart has been shaken. Sure enough, when Jacob was about to take Queenie away, Queenie did not follow directly, but wanted to stay and listen to what Grindelwald was going to say. From being unswervingly moving towards one party to wavering, although it has not yet fallen to the other party, this in itself is already an obvious tendency on the other side. Tina and Newt obviously had other thoughts about the scene in front of them. All of this is obviously Grindelwald's conspiracy to lure them here. From this, it can be speculated that the things they investigated here may have passed through Grindelwald's hands. In this way, the credibility of the Lestrange family tree just now will be questioned. That is, Cavus may not be dead, audience? Question mark. They have finally sorted out the complex interpersonal relationship. Now you tell us that there may be false news in it. At this point, the audience has completely given up thinking. Do whatever you want. Anyway, this is Credence's main plot, which will definitely be revealed later. Then you'll have a good time waiting. Adam. shrugged his shoulders. Credence's life story would be revealed in the third part, and screenwriter Adam had other things to do next. China's National Martial Arts Championship, Hogwarts' higher education department, economic control of the wizarding world in Europe and the United States, unless Professor Dumbledore or Professor Scamander, the parties involved, personally come forward to tell everyone about Credence's life story. Otherwise everyone will have to wait until at least the second half of the year. Adam shook his head and cast his eyes on the screen. In the expectation of everyone, Grindelwald slowly walked to the center of the square. The tide of applause sounded from all directions. The audience around him were clearly standing higher than Grindelwald, but Grindelwald in the center of the square seemed to stand above. Thousands of people gently raised his hands, and the applause stopped immediately. Watching this scene, the audience once again felt a gap between Voldemort and Grindelwald. Look at the Death Eaters meeting. A group of people gathered around a long table, looking at Voldemort in fear or madness, and basically just listening to what Voldemort said, and then laughing foolishly after Voldemort finished speaking. Suddenly, "I feel like we lost." A wizard couldn't help but sigh in a low voice, and was grabbed by his shoulders and shaken by his friends. Don't develop an inexplicable competitive spirit in a place like this. What's there to say about the fact that the terrorists produced in this country are not as good as those in other countries? Chapter 421, bringing a little Muggle shock to the wizards. My brothers, sisters, friends, as Grindelwald's speech began, the audience's various emotions slowly calmed down. Harry and Ron looked at Grindelwald on the screen, silent after a long time. Ron whispered, "Harry, do you think this scene is a little familiar?" "Yes," Harry thought. "Isn't this what Professor Grindelwald looked like when he taught them?" "Why do I think what he said makes sense? Is it because of the habit left over from the previous class?" Ron scratched the back of his head and thought it must be because he had taken Professor Grindelwald's class before. It can't be because he really agreed with Grindelwald's ideas. Impossible, right? Don't think too much. Harry patted Ron on the shoulder, looked at his somewhat uneasy expression and comforted him. "You think what he said makes sense because what he said now does make sense." Ron couldn't help but exclaimed, lowering his voice to Harry, "Harry, you wouldn't also, eh?" "Why did I say also? What are you thinking about?" Harry gave Ron a backhand elbow and explained speechlessly, "What Grindelwald said now does make sense, but the problem is that this is not his thought, or not entirely. Grindelwald is not stupid. He clearly knows that all his thoughts are actually very anti-human and cannot be said to everyone. It's okay to say it in front of the closest assistants, but if he tells all his followers in public, I'm afraid that most of his followers will run away soon, and only a group of extremists who hate Muggles will be left. So when he gives a speech, he will cover up his thoughts a little bit, only saying 70%, all of which are true, and just grasp the degree that can incite the most wizards he can incite. For example, regarding his attitude towards Muggles, he will only say that he thinks Muggles are different from them. He does not hate them, and he thinks that as people with magic, they should lead Muggles to create a better world. He will not say that in his eyes, Muggles are no different from livestock. He really did not lie, but just kept 30%, and did not go further or make it clear. Do people think that they are no different from livestock? Do people hate cows that plow the land and donkeys that pull the mill? People only use useful livestock to make the world better and kill those useless livestock. Ironically, this pride in Muggles and magical animals without complex magical abilities led to Grindelwald's final failure. So Queenie looked at Grindelwald in the field, her eyes lit up, and she deeply agreed with it. Although Queenie is a natural telepath, Grindelwald's brain occlusion is too advanced, and Queenie can't read his thoughts. In the corner of the screening room, Professor Dumbledore looked at the audience around him who were listening to the speech attentively, and his eyelids couldn't help but twitch a few times. What is Adam doing? Help Grindelwald create an opportunity to make a comeback decades later? But if that's the case, what about Grindelwald's dark history before? Seeing this, Adam couldn't help shaking his head. Professor Dumbledore really had no experience in dealing with such cults and pyramid schemes. Fortunately, he was dealing with his former lover at the time, and he stopped resisting after being defeated. To deal with such an organization, especially one with a clear core of belief, it is useless to simply cover up and suppress it. It will only make other members have a mentality like, my brother is targeted by the whole world, and he only has me. I must stand by my brother. The truly effective means is to break this oil for the development of such an organization and let everyone see the truth hidden by the organization. Adam promoted the progress of the wizarding world and broke the law of confidentiality, which was the former, And these movies were the latter. These two movies may make some members of the Witch Party who still have hope for Grindelwald's return see the reality clearly. You should know that the Dream Cinema has opened branches in the wizarding world in many European and American countries, and the Boy Who Lived series has brought a lot of sensation to the wizarding world in various countries that has been quiet for a while. Is life in the neighboring opposite country so exciting? It's funny that during the Chinese New Year, the MACUSA seemed to want to calm down the discussion about the previous headquarters being burned down, and intentionally or unintentionally promoted the Dream Cinema and the Boy Who Lived series. The meaning is roughly, although there are some small waves here, look at other countries, they are in dire straits. In comparison, the MACUSA has done a good job. As a result, after the popularity of the Dream Cinema, the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them series started. The follow-up is that the manager of the Dream Cinema's branch in the United States was assassinated 7 times in 3 days. For this reason, Adam had to go to the MACUSA in person and talk to the current MACUSA president and several vice presidents who finally returned to the United States for a whole night, and the matter was resolved. Thinking of the president of the MACUSA with the gray hair and unstable walking, Adam couldn't help shaking his head after mobilizing so many people for so long but getting nothing in the Sky Garden. Plus he is too old. The old man probably won't be the president for many years. The next president should be Samuel. Thinking of the only wizard who didn't behave so badly at that time, Adam didn't have any extra thoughts, but just hoped that he would be more sensible after taking office. The movie is still going on. The momentum of Grindelwald's speech is so huge that the people in the Ministry of Magic certainly can't miss it. Under the leadership of Theseus, the Aurors have arrived at Père Lachaise Cemetery, but Grindelwald's speech is not only open to followers. It is not illegal to simply listen to his speech, so the Aurors can't just use the means of dealing with prisoners to deal with them. That will only push all the wizards present to Grindelwald's side at the same time. Grindelwald showed everyone the prophecy about World War II, looking at the tall tanks rolling over and the planes shooting bullets flying in the air. The wizards in and outside the movie showed a look of horror on their faces. Is this Muggle? The textbook of Muggle studies doesn't say so. The cold steel torrent brought a small wave of Muggle shock to the wizards. Seeing this, Professor Dumbledore sighed and stopped thinking about the Statute of Secrecy. Muggles' technology is changing with each passing day, but wizards' cognition is still stuck in the past. Indeed, if you insist on saying it, it's not impossible to fight between wizards and Muggles. The Imperious Curse and Apparition cannot be solved with the current Muggle technology level, but that's premise is that wizards really realize that Muggles want to go to war with them and have the strength to go to war with them. Wizards eat hot pot and sing songs, while Muggles aim at an unobservable area on the satellite map and press the button. What's more, war has always been the last choice, and development is the eternal theme. The entertainment industry can only flourish in peacetime. Chapter 422 I will set Paris on fire. When the atomic bomb exploded and the mushroom cloud slowly rose, the audience was immersed in shock and did not notice that Newt's eyes were cast on Grindelwald's chest at the same time. A little black cutie opened Newt's suitcase and slipped out quietly. Oh, no, not all the audience did not notice this. FXXK, Professor Grindelwald in the corner of the theater was still admiring his heroic appearance at the time, but his face turned black when he saw this. He did attract many followers in that speech, but his blood alliance was also stolen. So he lost the day. I hate Paris. After denouncing the bloody brutality, greed and harm of Muggles, and the harm to wizards, Grindelwald openly pointed out that there were horrors at the scene. Grindelwald never concealed things that did not need to be concealed, especially those things that others thought he should conceal, or those things that Grindelwald made others think he should conceal. In short, this style made him look very sincere, which is why his followers trust him so much. Logically, many of the audience present were not his followers yet, and the Aurors could not take action, otherwise they would push people to his side physically. Even if the Aurors present were tied together, they could neither talk nor beat him. So there was no need for him to hide the existence of the Aurors. On the contrary, if the existence of the Aurors was pointed out, everyone would instinctively reject the Aurors during his speech, and at this time, only a little stimulation and promotion was needed. A nervous Auror subconsciously released a killing curse at the audience, who raised their wands towards him, which immediately aroused a cry of surprise, and hundreds of wands were pointed at the Aurors. Stop. At the critical moment, it was Grindelwald who stopped the conflict from escalating further. His goal had been achieved, and the people present who could be won over had already turned to him in their hearts, and each of them could bring him more followers, and the Ministry of Magic of various countries had no evidence to catch them, yet letting them fight with the Aurors would give the Ministry of Magic a reason to arrest them, and his benefits would be discounted. Coming to the audience member who was killed, Grindelwald mourned for her with a sad face in the screening room. Professor Grindelwald looked at the Niffler that was slowly approaching himself in the movie, and he slapped his thigh in anger. Stop acting. Your blood alliance will be stolen. However, that was not just a movie, but also history. Grindelwald at that time had not been severely taught a lesson by magical animals. With Grindelwald's strength, he could not have failed to notice the approach of the Niffler, but at this time he was still extremely arrogant towards magical animals, thinking that although they had magical abilities, they were too simple. How could he be wary of a Niffler? At the end of Grindelwald's speech, he hoped that everyone could tell more people about the content of his speech and what happened here. The Aurors knew that this was dangerous, but on the one hand, the audience said nothing, and the Aurors could not arrest them. On the other hand, look at this huge crowd of people. They are all pure-blooded adult wizards. Aurors are not as powerful as Grindelwald and Dumbledore. If they really fight, they don't need to consider the chance of winning. The limit is to try to take away a few more people before being overwhelmed by the spell. After the audiences paraded away one by one, the square suddenly became empty, leaving only people who were not just there to listen to the speech. For example, the four protagonists, Credence Nagini, Grindelwald's followers, and the Aurors who came to arrest Grindelwald. Facing the Aurors who were going to rush forward and fight him, Grindelwald sneered, waved his wand lightly, and blue flames ignited around him. In a blink of an eye, they formed a circle in the center of the square. Fire. Shield protection. Harry sighed this spell. After Professor Grindelwald became the professor of defense against the dark arts, many students who performed well in defense against the dark arts were taught this spell because of his outstanding appearance and powerful effect. Even he had learned a few tricks, but he didn't use it much because he couldn't control the fire very well, so the spell was originally used to deal with Aurors. Facing the Aurors around him, Grindelwald's followers passed through the fire one by one and left with apparition, but one of them encountered a little problem when passing through the fire because he respected Dumbledore and was not so loyal to Grindelwald. He was also included in the attack range of the fire shield, but the problem was not big and he died soon. It can only be said that it was a good thing that Voldemort didn't know this magic back then. Otherwise there would be less than one hand among the few Death Eaters who could pass through the fire shield. But Voldemort himself actually knew that the Death Eaters were not so loyal to him, and he didn't care about it. If he really knew this magic, he would probably only use it to detect a few people. Facing the people in front of him, Grindelwald smiled and gave them two choices: either pass through the fire and follow him, or fall in the fire. As he spoke, the flames slowly spread around, and several Aurors were engulfed the moment they came into contact with the flames. Faced with Grindelwald's recruitment, Credence finally made a choice. He had rejected Grindelwald before, and Grindelwald provided him with the clues that he had broken halfway through his investigation, so he came to Père Lachaise Cemetery. He did get more detailed information about his life here, but he lost confidence in continuing the investigation on his own. He wanted to ask Grindelwald for help. He wanted to know who he really was, so Credence rejected Nagini's request to stay and pass through the fire shield. Nagini did not follow. She was a blood curse orc. Strictly speaking, this kind of existence was more like a werewolf than a wizard, and she did not want to join Grindelwald from the bottom of her heart. She would only be burned to death if she followed him. The same drama was played on the other side. Jacob tried to take Queenie away, but Queenie was completely persuaded by Grindelwald. She wanted a future where wizards could be with muggles openly, without having to leave the United States with Jacob, or even hide herself in front of muggles. In Jacob's incredulous eyes, after Queenie failed to get Jacob to go with her, she resolutely let go of Jacob's hand and passed through the fire shield. Jacob still retreated, but it didn't matter. She knew he still loved her, but he was too cowardly. When Grindelwald's plan succeeds, they can be together openly. Chapter 423. Do you think Dumbledore will mourn for you? Professor Scamander and Mrs. Tina were also a little shocked when they watched this scene. At that time, they were being attacked by Grindelwald's fire shield. It was not easy to maintain self-protection, so how could they pay attention to other places? They did know that Queenie chose to join Grindelwald at that time, but they didn't know what happened between Queenie and Jacob before that, especially Newt. He was targeted by Grindelwald at the time. Mr. Scamander, do you think Dumbledore will mourn for you? Yes, that's right. That's what happened at that time. Professor Scamander sighed as he looked at himself struggling on the screen. Later, he probably realized why he was targeted by Grindelwald. Although so many years have passed, He still wants to say that there is really nothing between him and Professor Dumbledore. After being helpless, Professor Scamander's eyes slowly became sad. He knew what was going to happen next. Because Newt and Theseus were facing Grindelwald's attack, Leta attracted Grindelwald's attention and then attacked Grindelwald. However, her strength was still too weak to face Grindelwald. Just by shooting down the hookah that Grindelwald used to show the prophecy to his followers, Leta had turned into ashes in the flames like other Aurors. Newt struggled to hold Theseus, who was in a rage because of the death of his fiancée, and apparated away, so that Leta's efforts would not be in vain. The audience did not have such a deep impression of Leta, so not many people were touched by this scene. Only Professor Scamander wiped his eyes. Mrs. Tina patted the back of his hand soothingly. Before, Grindelwald thought that Leta, as a member of the Lestrange family, might be recruited. After killing Leta, there was obviously no one left who was worth him staying, so Grindelwald directly apparated away from Père Lachaise Cemetery, and the fire shield that lost control instantly collapsed and expanded wildly in all directions. It is obvious that this spell combined some of the magic principles of the fiend fire during its creation, so the flame has the property of automatic expansion, and it can also evolve into a ferocious fire beast. At this critical moment, Nicholas Flamel, who had been running for half a day, finally arrived at the scene. Under his leadership, a group of surviving wizards worked together to use the end of spells to stop the raging fire beast. After burning the central square and struggling to attack several times without success, the fire beast that lost its magic supply dissipated in the air. In vain looking at the scorched earth and ruins in front of them, a group of wizards finally breathed a sigh of relief, and the sense of relief for surviving the disaster surged in their hearts. But what followed was the pain of losing their loved ones in the fire, especially the Scamander brothers, one of whom lost his fiancée and the other lost his once secret love friend because of Rita's death. Newt finally made up his mind and chose to join the struggle that affected the European and American wizarding world. This time it was Rita, maybe next time it would be Tina. If he continued to stay out of it, then maybe he would receive the news of Tina's death at some point. He didn't want to lose anyone close to him again. Newt, in order to prevent you from breaking up my CP like you did with my brother, I have to break up the two of you first. At this moment, a Niffler covered in dust and seemingly injured came out of the bushes in a somewhat embarrassed manner. The audience was shocked. They had all forgotten the Niffler who sneaked out of the box just now. However, with such a big fire, I don't know how many Aurors died, but this Niffler only looked a little embarrassed. Is the Niffler's combat power higher than that of the Aurors? Not to mention the combat power, the damage caused by this Niffler to Grindelwald is indeed higher than that of the Aurors in the world combined. Newt quickly comforted the little guy who finally knew to go home on his own initiative, and then found what he wanted from Sniff's pocket, the blood alliance that was originally placed on Grindelwald's chest. Seeing this scene, the audience, who were already shocked just now, couldn't help but exclaim, "Beast, Professor!" Grindelwald's teeth were about to break. At the same time, Professor Grindelwald's hands were tightly clenched on his chest. He clearly remembered that his blood alliance was placed here at that time, and then he found that the blood alliance was gone after he went back. Gone. Looking at Professor Grindelwald's movements, his ferocious expression and his red and congested face, those who didn't know would think that the old man had a heart attack. Obviously, Professor Dumbledore was a little worried about this. Looking at Grindelwald, who seemed unhealthy, Professor Dumbledore sighed, "It's all in the past, don't be too obsessed. If it doesn't work, I'll make another blood pact with you. Anyway, even if Grindelwald wants to go crazy again, he doesn't have to worry that no one can control him because he has a blood pact with him. Adam will naturally take action." At that time, Professor Grindelwald, who was very hurt by the first half of the sentence, was revived on the spot after hearing the second half. "Are you serious? Really?" Looking at Grindelwald's appearance, Professor Dumbledore knew that his worries about Grindelwald's health just now might be a bit redundant, but he didn't plan to regret it since he has made up his mind to let go of those responsibilities. He can also slowly become more willful. He is now just an old professor at Hogwarts. The camera turns. Nit goes to Hogwarts to find Professor Dumbledore and gives him the blood covenant he stole. On the other side, Grindelwald, who has adjusted his mood, begins to contact Credence. Professor Grindelwald is relieved. Fortunately, Adam did not film his reaction when he found out that the blood covenant was stolen. Everyone can see that the movie has come to an end, but what no one expected is that there is a shocking melon at the end of the movie. Credence's real name is Aurelius Dumbledore, Professor Dumbledore's Dumbledore. When the audience saw the phoenix, they had already had such an absurd idea that Credence could not be from the Dumbledore family, but they soon dispelled this idea. The reason is simple. They have never heard that the Dumbledore family has branches in other countries, and the situation of Professor Dumbledore's family, because of the popularity of The Boy Who Lived series. Basically all wizards in the UK are very clear about Professor Dumbledore's family situation: the mother who had passed away long ago, the father who also died hastily after entering Azkaban, Professor Dumbledore himself who was male in both gender and hobbies, the grumpy old bachelor Aberforth Dumbledore, and Ariana Dumbledore who died young due to an accident. There are only 5 people in total, and looking at it, there is no possibility of additional branches at all. Could it be that Professor Dumbledore's father had other branches, such as his uncle? If so, then if Credence encountered any unexpected events later, it would indeed be consistent with the current situation that there is no branch of the Dumbledore family abroad. Chapter 424 Predicting the future is called prophecy, but what is predicting the past called? When leaving the scene, the audience was still excited about learning Credence's true life experience, and couldn't help but begin to speculate about what this was all about. Adam, who was watching all this in the screening room, fell into deep thought. It's not surprising that everyone didn't expect Aberforth, the grumpy old man, to have descendants. After all, there is no sign that he ever had children or was married in The Boy Who Lived series. However, despite all the mistakes in the process, everyone still accidentally guessed that Credence died in the end, and Adam was still somewhat impressed. Well, the next step is to go to Professor Scamander's appointment. After sending a card to reserve a box at the Storm restaurant to Professor Scamander, Adam disappeared and reappeared in the Storm restaurant to entertain Professor Scamander. Of course you have to make good preparations. I happen to have collected a lot of authentic delicacies in China. This authentic one is certified by the Yoon brothers and is truly local. Some of the flavors even surprised Adam. Did he always think that the authentic flavors were transformed with local characteristics? Obviously even the locals who live there say the food is authentic. At this moment, a short story suddenly popped into Adam's mind. The mutton soup that a certain chef worked so hard to prepare was not authentic by a customer who was said to have stayed in Mongolia for a long time. He boiled another pot of boiled water and added a spoonful of Sanhua evaporated milk. The customer drank the soup and slammed the table, saying it tasted like this. So those so-called locals who say it's authentic. Adam was silent for a moment, shaking his head not to think about this horrifying question. As Adam took out the delicacies that had been frozen in time, Professor Scamander and his wife also arrived. Calculating the time, they should have rushed here directly after leaving the cinema. It seems that they are really interested in these 2 movies. Sure enough, after sitting down and chatting for a while, Professor Scamander directly asked Adam where he learned about the past. You must know that a large part of the past mentioned in the 2 movies is confidential, and many are private. Many of them are the only parties involved, and no one else should know about it. In this regard, Adam also prepared his words, and he said calmly, Professor Scamander should remember that I inherited the legacy of Mr. Nico Flamel. Professor Scamander showed some regret on his face and nodded, yes, but Mr. Flamel probably doesn't know all of these past events. He does not know, but he is not incapable of knowing. Adam smiled mysteriously, took out a crystal ball, and placed it on the table together with a base. This is, Professor. Scamander raised his eyebrows slightly. If this thing was taken out normally, there might be doubts, but combined with their conversation just now and the past they just relived through the movie, Monsieur Flamel's crystal ball, yes, this is a special alchemy item. It can not only show the contents of divination to others, but also strengthen the user's divination ability. It just so happens that I have a little divination ability. Adam stretched out his thumb and index finger and made a little bit gesture that made the countryman angry. So, you used a crystal ball to divine the past, MRS. Tina said in disbelief. Divination about the future is called prophecy, but what is divination about the past called? Called Rhea. Adam shrugged his shoulders and gave the reason he had prepared. That's right, I'm also curious about why this happens, but who can say accurately about divination, although it sounds a little surprising. For example, what is the significance of divination in the past, and why does the past appear in divination? But there is no way to prove it after all. Divination is indeed uncertain, highly subjective and has very few samples. People with divination talents are rare in the wizarding world. Everyone's divination methods and the results they get are also different. Some are images and some are poems. Many of the divination are even aimed at events that are unknown how many years in the future. For example, the collection of poems that appeared in the movie just now is a divination of things that will happen decades after the soothsayer's death. Until the predictions in it are confirmed, Everyone can only call it a collection of poems. There are also a lot of crystal balls in the prophecy hall, each of which contains a prophecy that has not yet been fulfilled, and some of them even span hundreds or thousands of years. Since there are even people who can divine events thousands of years in the future, why can't there be someone whose gift is to divine events that happened in the past? No one can beat their chest and say that the possibility is zero. Therefore, although Mrs. Tina thought it was a bit ridiculous, she thought it was possible because it was so ridiculous, and she really couldn't think of any other possibility. It couldn't be that when those things happened back then, there was an invisible person who was there to take notes for everyone, right? It's true that there were no people in sight, but it's hard to say. Behind the fourth wall, Adam touched his nose. He still hasn't figured out why the world of Harry Potter is related to the world of his previous life. Maybe there are people watching him through the screen now. After looking at Mrs. Tina, who was deep in thought, Adam turned to look at Professor Scamander. Probably because he was already more active in thinking, Professor Scamander accepted this more quickly. Professor Scamander then looked at Adam and asked, "So, I want to ask, have you seen anything else? I mean, will there be a third part of Fantastic Beasts and where to find them?" "Well, yes, there's a third part, about breaking the Blood Alliance, the International Federation of Wizards, and killing. But I need to sort out the content of the third part, and it will have to wait until the second half of the year at the earliest." Adam shrugged his shoulders. He really needed to go back and take a look. After all, this time he couldn't say he made it up like the boy who lived. Professor Scamander expressed regret for this, but also said that he would definitely come to watch the premiere. From those three keywords, he already knew which part of the third movie Adam was talking about. After all, even if it's a true story, turning it into a movie still requires some lens language, and I have some other things to do recently. Professor Scamander nodded in understanding, but, after thinking about it carefully, Professor Scamander discovered something was wrong at the same time. Aren't Professor Dumbledore and Grindelwald related to the three keywords Adam mentioned just now? If I remember correctly, he is the protagonist of this series of movies. Ahem. Seeing Professor Scamander's confusion, Adam couldn't help but cough twice in embarrassment. No way, the plot of the third part is indeed a bit stretched compared to the first two. Most of the highlights of the whole story are on Professor Dumbledore and Grindelwald, followed by Jacob the Chosen One, and Professor Scamander the most. The only thing left that is impressive is the dance of the Manticore. This is why Adam needs to make some changes to the movie, but that will come later. Chapter 425 this year and number 039, particularly exciting tournament. Well, I didn't expect that the competition for cultivators would be held in the same place as the competition for ordinary people. Walking out of the airport, Adam couldn't help but be stunned when he saw the banner welcoming the participating teams from various provinces and cities not far away. After all, it's very troublesome to build a venue for a competition. It's better not to use it. The office arranged for the two brothers Yoon Jinshu and Yoon Yanhu to pick him up at the airport. One of them helped Adam push the suitcase, and the other was responsible for explaining, "The car is parked in front. Adam, do you want to go somewhere else to play first, or go directly to the accommodation area next to the competition venue, because they are of similar age and have been together for a long time before?" The words between Adam and the two brothers of the Yoon family are not so polite. Accommodation area. Adam's eyes lit up. "Will all the sects participating in the competition live there?" "Yes, because we know that you are interested in the cultivators here." The office deliberately did not arrange accommodation separately. Thoughtful, Adam smiled and nodded. It is indeed a rare experience to be able to have close contact with the cultivators from China, and from various sects. Sometimes I really can't help but sigh. "Adam, your conversation is exactly like that of the native Chinese." Yoon Yanhu, who was pushing the luggage, couldn't help but say it's okay that there is no accent in Chinese, and it can be understood that Adam's mother usually communicates with him in Chinese, and there is a language environment. But would the words thoughtful really appear in the context of communication between mother and son? It would never appear in English communication, right? Adam just smiled naturally. "You can treat me as a native Chinese." Yoon Yanhu just sighed, which was not even a flaw. Then he got in the car, and the two brothers began to introduce the situation of the championship to Adam, occasionally interspersed with some evaluation and introduction of the surrounding scenery. "Speaking of which, Adam, you really came to this competition. This year's competition will probably be very exciting, huh?" Adam looked at Yoon Jinshu, who was talking with great joy, and thought for a while, "Is there anything special about the contestants?" "Generally speaking, The process of this kind of competition is fixed, and the only thing that can change is the contestants. Yes, I don't know if it was agreed that many young core disciples of many sects participated in this competition, and this does not include those who may have heard of it. Compared with the last session, this year's competition can be said to be a fight between dragons and tigers. Yoon Jinshu couldn't help but bring some expectations and yearning while speaking. If I participated in this competition, I'm afraid it would be difficult to squeeze into the top 10, although he said so. Yoon Jinshu's tone clearly showed that he would rather not have a high ranking and still want to participate in this competition. Don't even think about it, it's still in the top 10. Yoon Yan rolled his eyes at his brother's boasting. Xianxi Mansion, Chongyang Palace, Myanshan Daluo Palace, Jiuxia Wanfu Palace, Lingayan Temple, Puji Temple, Qinglong Temple, Daishin Temple, Bilayong Academy, Yangming Academy. These are 10, and I can count another 20 or 30 for you. Adam was a little surprised when he heard this. Could it be that I am really the protagonist and I can catch up with rare events wherever I go? But Adam soon came to his senses. This kind of thing is probably just a coincidence, otherwise when he first knew about this tournament, he should have happened to encounter the opening of the tournament facing Yoon Yanhu's sabotage. Yoon Jinshu's face suddenly turned red. It's not about who is more famous or popular. They may not be able to beat me on stage. Yeah, Adam was also a little curious. Didn't you say before that Shushan Taoist flying sword is the best? It is indeed the best flying sword. Although flying swords are good at attacking, the biggest advantage of flying swords is their extremely long range. It is impossible for the two sides to open up 800 meters in the ring battle. Yoon Yanhu was a little helpless when he spoke. We are already the best in Shushan flying swords in this generation. There are many outstanding disciples, but even in our class, we were only the 3rd or 4th place. So that's how it is. Adam understood, but he didn't think anything rude. It's normal for each sect to have its own strengths. Look at it on the bright side. Your sect, which is similar to a sniper, can still beat the 3rd or 4th place even when being approached. It's already very good. The correct way to use a flying sword should be to give you a hard blow from 800 miles away. No matter how many tricks you have, you will be beheaded by the time you react. The two brothers of the Yoon family just smiled at this. They obviously didn't have too much entanglement about it. Come to think of it, from what you said, besides flying swords, Shushan has other ways. Of course, as one of the 3 major mainstreams of Taoism, how could everyone in such a big Shushan only practice flying swords? Seeing Adam's curious expression, Yoon Yanhu further explained, there are countless branches of Taoism, but generally speaking, it is recognized that there are 3 veins. The main practice of talismans is Longhoshan, the main practice of inner alchemy is Chongyang Palace, and the main practice of flying tools is Shushan. But this division is not very accurate. After all, they are all Taoists. Even if there are untold secrets, everyone in the general category will know what they should know. There are also people practicing talismans and inner alchemy as Shushan. Hearing this, Yoon Jinshu couldn't help but interrupt. So a clearer and easier to understand classification is that Longhu Mountain is the leader of Zhengai, Chongyang Palace is the leader of Quansun, and Shushan is the leader of Sangxiu. Shushan is Sangxiu. Adam blinked. Shushan is also a famous sect. Why is it classified as Sangxiu? The founder of Shushan is Yinzu. Strictly speaking, it is not Taoism, but Taoism, and this classification is just for the convenience of understanding. Anyway, Zhengai and Quansun are all on our side. Yoon Jinshu added an explanation. Adam suddenly realized, then thought about the exchange between the two just now, and had another question. By the way, why didn't you mention Shaolin Temple in the examples you gave before? Yoon Yanhu seemed to have randomly cited 10 examples from the 3 religions at that time, but it can still be vaguely seen that the famous ones will be ranked first. But Yoon Yanhu cited 4 examples of Buddhist temples and did not mention Shaolin Temple. Logically speaking, as the ancestral home of Zen Buddhism, Shaolin Temple should be the first temple that most people think of when they mention Buddhism. They would not deliberately skip it. Shaolin Temple is indeed very famous among ordinary people who are not practitioners, and it was indeed the #1 temple in Buddhism before. Yoon Yanhu blinked and explained, but after the founding of the People's Republic of China, the office was established, and the monks practicing in Shaolin Temple were scattered to various temples. Why? Adam was a little confused. Is this a confrontation between the office and Shaolin Temple? That shouldn't be the case. No matter how you think about it, if Shaolin Temple confronts the office, Shaolin Temple will lose after confronting the office. There is no reason for the office to let those monks disperse to other temples. Even if they are not killed, they should at least let them return to secular life, right? Fortunately, Yoon Jinshu's next explanation immediately answered Adam's doubts. At that time, Shaolin Temple's reputation in Buddhism was too high, and it was not easy to manage. So, end of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.